Hey guys, tonight we're slipping off our sandals and stepping into the hot, dust-swirled heart of an ancient empire, Babylon, the land of towering ziggurats, glittering gold, and a whole lot of bureaucratic clay tablets. But forget the kings, forget Hammurabi's long-winded laws. Tonight, we're following a different thread, a hidden thread woven right into the daily life of the city, the lives of prostitutes, the sacred, the scorned, the complicated. You're about to walk into their world, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Like, truly. You'd make it maybe 3 blocks before collapsing from heatstroke, getting conned out of your sandals, or catching an infection you can't even pronounce. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your city and the time you're watching this in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little corner of history travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of a great city. Dust hangs like breath in the summer heat, and ahead, Babylon gleams. This isn't the Babylon of some Sunday school cartoon. The bricks here pulse with real sun, sweat, and life. The Ishtar Gate looms before you, as surreal as any palace from a dream. Blue-glazed tiles flash with golden lions and bulls, and beyond it lies a maze of winding alleys, sharp smells, and urgent whispers. The city hums like it's alive. You catch a whiff of baking barley bread, the sharp sting of fresh urine, maybe perfume, and something smokier you can't quite place. It's a cocktail of gods, goats, and gossip. Merchants shout in Akkadian, kids dart between legs, and robed scribes balance wax tablets in one hand, dates in the other. The air buzzes with a chaotic dignity. You pass the ziggurat of Itamananki, that dizzying mountain of mud bricks stacked in giant squares, stretching up into the blue. They say it touches heaven. The priests up there, closest thing to celebrity. But tonight, you're not here for gods. You're here for the women no one carved statues of, whose names didn't make it into the victory hymns, the prostitutes. Babylon had a word for everything and about 20 words for them. You wind deeper into the older parts of town, away from the sharp angles of state temples and into something more fluid. Streets narrow. You step around a child squatting mid-poop. Ancient plumbing optional. And suddenly you're there. Harimtu Street, they used to call it, or something like it. Translated kindly, the street of the prostitutes. But here's the catch. These women weren't just prostitutes in the modern sense. Some were sacred, some were slaves, some were something in between, and nobody agreed on which was which. There's laughter ahead, low and musical. You round a corner and see her. No name, names are risky, but she leans in a doorway with eyes like wet clay and an anklet that jingles. Her hair is dark, oiled, braided in layers. Her robe slips off one shoulder just enough to look careless, but you can tell it's intentional. She's working, not begging, not offering, just existing with the kind of controlled ease that says, I've seen kings bleed. And here's your first real history pill of the night. Not all prostitutes in Babylon were considered sinful, lowly, or even poor. Some were linked to the temples, to goddesses like Ishtar or Inanna. You know her, the goddess of love, war, and absolute chaos. Her followers sometimes practiced sacred prostitution, though modern historians argue furiously about what that even meant. Was it real ritual sex? Symbolic acts? Misunderstood by later writers? It's still hotly debated, but not everyone was sacred. Far from it. Most sex workers weren't priestesses at all. They lived hard, fast lives and navigated a brutal urban jungle with wit and guts. Some worked from tiny stalls no wider than a doorway. Others had rooms in brothels, or in the back of taverns. Many were slaves, and some, curiously, were freelancers. Not owned, not temple-bound, just surviving. Your mysterious doorway woman steps back, leaving behind only the sound of her anklet and a puff of perfumed air. You follow cautiously, passing what looks like a wall of soft clay bricks, each one carved with strange little wedges. Cuneiform, Babylon's writing. Thousands of years old, and somehow a few of these tablets talk about women like her. Not many, of course. No one's etching erotic memoirs into clay. But here and there, a complaint from a jealous wife, a contract for a concubine, a fine for public lewdness. Traces. You duck into a shadowy room behind the street. It smells of rose oil and stale beer. The woman is gone now, maybe she never was there. But others sit near low tables, smoking what might be frankincense or something stronger, gossiping in rapid-fire Sumerian Akkadian slang. They have names like Iltani, Shamhat, Beltu, and even if you can't understand every word, their tone says everything. Sass, warning, pride, exhaustion. A tiny old woman sits on a stool in the corner, skin like papyrus. She's painting her eyelids with crushed minerals and talking about the good old days when Ishtar's name actually meant something and when temple coins flowed like wine. She's probably lying, but you want to believe her. Now for the quirky bit. Ancient Babylon had a sex work hierarchy and a word ranking system. A harimtu was your standard independent prostitute, usually not connected to a temple. A kadishtu might be temple associated, though not always sexually active. A ishtaritu had prestige, mystery, and sometimes actual power. But here's the weird part. Some women chose this life not because they were forced, but because it gave them an identity, a role, and even access to literacy, something a farmer's daughter would rarely get. The old woman cackles. She says, "Once, a man gave me a ring made of lapis lazuli. He died choking on date pit. That's the gods for you." Everyone laughs, and for a second, the room feels warm, like any friend circle across time. But the warmth fades quickly. You catch a glance between two younger girls. Fear. Outside, a man shouts. You hear sandals scrape, then silence. These lives may have been layered with ritual and perfume, but danger is always a breath away. A client who doesn't pay, a jealous wife with connections, a temple tax collector who looks the other way if you pay him right, or breaks your fingers if you don't. Still, in the dim candlelight of the brothel or the open-air tavern, or the temple's shadowy chamber, these women carved out a life. Not honoured, not safe, but real, and somehow still whispering through the ruins. The heat hasn't let up, not even a little. It's the kind of late-day Babylonian burn that sticks to your skin like oil. But you press on, weaving through the narrow corridors that twist behind the city's shining facade. It's one thing to hear about Babylon in history books, its ziggurats and gardens and tablets, but you're not in the books anymore. You're in the gut of it now, the hidden streets, the murmuring alleyways, the lived-in parts where history gets sweaty and human. Welcome to the Street of the Prostitutes. It isn't officially named that, of course. No one chisels that onto a building, but everyone knows. The vendors, the guards, the bakers, even the kids hawking stale figs. They give it a wide berth or walk through with eyes lowered. Here, in these back quarters, is where ritual collides with reality, where goddesses like Ishtar fade into human desperation, and where women carve out an existence one transaction at a time. You round a bend and the energy shifts. There's music, someone plucking a stringed lyre, lazy and hypnotic. Incense coils into the air from a brazier made out of cracked pottery, and a group of men sit on carpets outside what might once have been a bathhouse. You can't tell if it's a tavern or a brothel. Honestly, it's probably both. That's how things go in Babylon, functional overlap. You could buy wine, hire a woman, and settle a goat dispute all within arm's reach. Now here's something that most people don't realise. Babylonian prostitution wasn't confined to a single type of venue. It was mobile, adaptable, and embedded in almost every layer of the city's infrastructure. Taverns doubled as brothels. Courtyards by the river acted as pickup zones. Even temples, especially those linked to Ishtar, were sometimes entangled in sexual commerce, though what sacred prostitution actually looked like is still an open scholarly cage match. One clay tablet describes a house of pleasure next to a granary. Another one records the punishment of a woman caught soliciting near a temple gate, though it's unclear whether she was caught doing something illegal or just annoying a priest who wasn't in the mood. That's Babylon for you. Rules as rigid as brick walls, but with enough loopholes to drive a chariot through. As you walk, you start to notice the signs, subtle but there. A red cloth tied to a doorframe. A woman leaning just so against a clay wall, head tilted, eyes watching. An older woman, probably the madam, sitting under a palm frond shade, rolling something between her fingers and pretending not to notice you. The social landscape here is its own kind of coded map. You pass a group of younger girls sitting on a blanket, their sandals off, toes curling in the dust as they braid one another's hair. Too young. They're watching and learning, not participating yet. You feel a twist in your stomach. Consent, in the way we talk about it now, didn't exactly factor in here. For some women, sex work meant survival. For others, it was inherited. institutional or enforced. That line between choice and coercion, it's blurry, it's been blurry for thousands of years. Then there are the clients. You get a good look at them here. They're not all lecherous creeps. Some are nervous, fidgety, clearly out of their element. A few wear the rich robes of scribes or administrators, flashing jewellery that's far too much for a place like this. One even has his young servant trailing behind, awkwardly holding a jug of beer while the man negotiates with a woman in blue. You sit near a wall to observe. A moment later, an older man shuffles past with a small clay tablet in his hand, an IOU maybe, or a list of goods he intends to barter. Not all transactions involved silver. Sometimes sex was traded for bread, oil, fabric, even livestock. One tablet found in the ruins of Sippa describes a man who offered his own daughter for sex in exchange for a goat. She was about 13, so yeah, ancient Babylon gets dark real fast. But here's the strange part. There were also protections, limited sure, loophole-laden definitely, but Babylon had laws, and some of those laws actually tried to regulate how sex workers were treated. For example, a harimtu, a street prostitute, could be punished for seducing another man's wife, but not for offering services to a married man. The logic? Men could pay for sex, but women couldn't seek it. Patriarchy strikes again. More bizarrely, in some cases, sex workers could even own property. A tablet from the old Babylonian period shows a woman, presumed to be a harimtu, who bought a small plot of land using earnings from her work. She carved her name into the deed. It's one of the rare instances where you see a sex worker exerting power, however modest. You finally spot a narrow stairway leading up to a low clay building. The walls are etched with faint markings, graffiti maybe, or prayers. As you climb, your fingers brush along tiny scratches in the surface. One of them is a crude drawing. A woman, arms out with stars around her head. It's old, very old, and you get the feeling that it wasn't drawn by a client. Inside the upper room, a breeze cuts through the heat. There's a window, rare in a city that values thick, windowless walls to keep out the sun, and in the centre of the room is a single mat. A woman sits beside it, combing her hair with something that looks like carved bone. She doesn't look at you, not directly, but she speaks. "New here?" she asks. Her voice is tired but sharp. "Don't stare too long, that's extra." You manage a small nod, even though your throat is dry. She sighs and glances out the window. "They say Ishtar walks these streets," as she mutters, "but I've yet to see her offer anyone a cup of water." A silence settles between you. Then, as if she's reading your mind, she adds, "Not all of us are here because we're cursed. Some of us just had nowhere else to go, and some of us, we were born right into this. Same walls, same heat, same gods that don't answer." You want to ask her name, but you don't. Names have power, and hers doesn't belong to you. Outside, the street thrums with life again, new clients, new music, new deals being struck beneath the same old sun. The sacred and the sordid side by side, as always. And the street of the prostitutes livolves on, tucked behind Babylon's grandeur, written in whispers and clay. The sun sinks lower now, drawing long shadows across the baked mud walls. But the city doesn't rest, not really. Babylon breathes in cycles, and this part of it, this neighbourhood tucked away behind shrines and marketplaces, begins to wake just as the rest start to doze. The streets grow a little bolder with dusk. The air smells thicker. More perfume, more sweat, more wine gone sour. A few torches flicker to life, their flames distorted in clay sconces. The colours warm and deepen, like everything is being painted over with amber and gold. You move quietly, watching, trying to understand the rules of a world that doesn't care if you understand it or not. It starts to occur to you that not just anyone could become a prostitute here. Contrary to the image of random destitute women flooding the streets, Babylon had its own strange gatekeeping. Class, family, and religious affiliations mattered, sometimes a lot. Your average farm girl from the rural south wouldn't just wander into the city and open up shop. She might end up in bondage instead. Poverty didn't automatically make you a prostitute, though it often handed you to someone who would decide for you. You pass a group of boys playing with clay balls near a low wall, their shouts echoing in the narrow street. Two women lean against that same wall, speaking in low voices. They're both dressed modestly, covered, veiled, hardly what you'd imagine. But you've learned by now that the flashy image of Babylonian harlots in golden chains and sheer robes is more myth than fact. The reality is subtler, wrapped in layers of cloth and irony. One of the women, older and with a stiff dignity in her spine, gives you a long look. She wears a headscarf, but her eyes are bare, and they track you like she's trying to decide if you're worth bothering with. You nod respectfully. She doesn't smile, but she doesn't spit either, which feels like a win. Here's where it gets weird. Depending on her status, a Babylonian sex worker might be honoured, ignored, or punished for simply existing, and much of that depended on where she came from and who she belonged to. Let's break it down a little. There were multiple types of sex workers: harimtu, kadishtu, ishtaritu, and not all of them meant prostitute the way we think of it. The harimtu were likely independent women who sold sexual services outside religious contexts. That could mean a lot of things. Some lived and worked in taverns, some walked the streets, some were semi-nomadic. Most scholars agree that this role was not necessarily tied to slavery, but also not exactly chosen in the modern sense. Many of these women were probably widows, runaways, or those disowned by family. Then there's the kadishtu, a slippery term. Some tablets seem to suggest they were sacred women, connected to temples but not always sexually active. They may have performed rituals, sang hymns, or even served as healers. Other records confuse them with the ishtaritu, who may have been involved in actual temple-based sexual rites. Or maybe they weren't. The whole thing is a scholarly pit of snakes. Some historians argue the entire idea of sacred prostitution is a Western misreading of religious texts. Others dig in and point to lines in Herodotus, who, let's be honest, wasn't exactly known for his rigorous fact-checking. Still, there's one tablet you remember, etched by a scribe named Nabu-Iddin, that describes a young girl dedicated to Ishtar and gifted to the temple by her father. She's 12. Whether her role was ceremonial or sexual, the outcome was the same. She no longer belonged to herself. And that's the part that stings. Whether you were born to a poor family, sold off in a dowry gone wrong, or offered to the gods in a moment of misguided piety, your body became someone else's to use. The layers of status and meaning didn't protect you from the same fundamental risk, being a woman in a city where men held the styluses and the silver. You pause at a water trough where a donkey is drinking, its ears flicking at invisible flies. Behind it, a narrow doorway opens into a shadowy room lit by a single oil lamp. Inside, a few women sit around a low table, slicing dates and chewing slowly. One of them is younger, maybe 16 and wears a thin gold chain around her wrist. She catches your eye, then looks away quickly. A voice beside you says, "Her father was a priest. She wasn't supposed to end up here." You turn to find a tall woman in a veil that shimmers faintly in the lamplight. Her voice is quiet but certain. She continues, "He lost a gamble, cards, or dice, maybe both. Traded her to cover his debt. She was promised to Ishtar. Guess Ishtar wasn't buying." You nod slowly, unsure what to say. It's hard to square that kind of story with the shimmering image of Babylon you grew up with, but this is the part of history that sticks like a pebble in your sandal, the part they don't etch into school books. Now for your fringe fact. There's a theory that some temple prostitutes in Babylon were not born female. At least one tablet mentions a third gender figure, possibly a eunuch, or a trans feminine person serving Ishtar in her rituals. These figures, called Kurgaru or Asinnu, dressed in women's clothes, sang sacred songs, and may have participated in certain sexual rites. Were they seen as blessed, cursed, or just different? The debate rages on, but their existence hints at a far stranger and more fluid world than most imagine when they picture the ancient past. And here's your scholarly scuffle of the night. Some researchers argue that prostitution wasn't even seen as shameful in early Babylon, that the association with sin and impurity only came later, influenced by later religious systems and moral codes. The argument goes that in pre-classical Mesopotamia, sexuality, especially when linked to fertility deities, was just a normal, even sacred part of life. Others argue this is a romantic revision, cherry-picking optimistic interpretations from fragments of clay. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in the grit between. You leave the water trough and continue on, the street now humming with soft laughter and clinking cups. Somewhere, someone sings a slow, mournful tune, a lullaby, a love song, hard to tell. The boundary between work and worship here is so thin it practically hums. As the moon rises over Babylon, silvering the tops of mud brick rooftops, you realize something. These women, these so-called prostitutes, weren't just one thing. They were daughters, priests, slaves, rebels, mothers, sometimes men, sometimes both, often forgotten. But in the sweat and dust of these streets, they mattered. They carried the city's secrets, held its stories in their hands, and if you listen close enough, they're still speaking, You wake up the next morning, if what you did could even be called sleep. It was more like a slow melting into the night, your body trying to understand what century it's in while the sounds of Babylon drifted over rooftops and through the cracked shutters of your borrowed room. Somewhere in the distance a rooster yells like he's auditioning for temple choir. Someone else, probably drunk, is still singing, and the city, beautiful beast that it is already stirring. You slide on your sandals and make your way down to the street, careful not to knock over a clay water jug someone left out for the gods, or maybe just for thirsty dogs. The morning smells different. Less incense, more baking bread, more livestock. The sun is already up, and with it the women of the city begin their transformations. And today, you're going to walk the line that separates one very particular transformation. What made someone a courtesan, and what made someone a priestess. You head toward one of the temples, not one of the massive ones with government scribes crawling all over, but a smaller, quieter structure tucked into the city's layered stonework. It's built low and wide, painted in fading whitewash, its doorway draped with linen that flutters in the early breeze. Inside there's a cool stillness. Someone is lighting oil lamps, murmuring prayers, and then you hear them. Women singing. Not drunken tavern songs or street chants, but something structured, rehearsed, oddly mathematical. You sneak a look around a pillar, and there they are. 6 women dressed in robes of muted indigo, hair bound in coils, eyes marked with kohl. These are not the streetwalkers of Harimtu Street. These women are priestesses of Ishtar. Or maybe they're Ishtari too, a term you've heard whispered but never properly explained. Their presence is controlled, almost regal. But then again, they serve the goddess of love, war, sex, and fertility, the multitasker of the Mesopotamian pantheon. Now here's where things get seriously tangled. See, in ancient Babylon, there wasn't a hard divide between the spiritual and the physical. The line between divine ritual and paid companionship could be as fluid as the Tigris during flood season. Some women in temples took part in fertility rites that by modern standards might qualify as sexual ceremonies. Others served through song, dance, or dream interpretation. And then there were the kadishtu, a word that appears on tablets with the frustrating ambiguity of a modern job title like consultant. Were they celibate? Were they sacred prostitutes? Were they divine handmaidens who kept the rituals running, but never actually participated in anything physical? Who one agrees. A few scholars think the confusion stems from translation. The root of kadishtu, kudas, means holy or set apart. But depending on context, set apart can mean anything from dedicated to the gods to forbidden or polluted. The result? A stew of overlapping roles that modern historians keep poking at with very long sticks. You step further into the temple's inner courtyard and notice a mural along the wall. Faded now, but you can make out the figure of Ishtar herself. She's flanked by lions, wearing a horned crown, wings unfurled. Beneath her are rows of human figures, mostly women, some kneeling, some dancing, some clearly in poses of ritual intimacy. It's not pornography, not really, it's myth. And myth in Babylon often had a very real physical expression. Now for your hard historical fact, we have actual legal documents from Babylon listing women attached to temples under contract. These women weren't slaves technically, but they weren't entirely free either. Some were offered to the temple as part of a family vow or as repayment for a debt. Others may have chosen the path themselves, especially if they came from poor backgrounds and saw temple life as a way to rise in rank, gain literacy, or even own property. You walk through a side hall and find a small room lined with shelves, each holding small clay tablets, wrapped in linen, tagged with wax seals. A young woman, maybe 17, sits behind a low desk, stylus in hand. She doesn't look up. She's copying a hymn, syllable by syllable, her brow furrowed in concentration. You realise, not for the first time, that some of the most educated women in Babylon were sex workers, or at least adjacent to them. Temple training meant literacy. Literacy meant power. And that's why some families willingly offered their daughters to temple service. Not out of cruelty, but strategy. You return to the outer chamber and take a seat on a wide stone bench. A new figure enters. A woman older than the others, her robe dyed a deep red, her wrists heavy with bangles. She carries herself like someone who's seen 100 summers and outlived every man who thought he owned her. She doesn't speak, she simply nods to the singers, who shift their positions and begin again, this time with a different chant. The language is older than Akkadian, probably Sumerian. You catch the word nin, lady, and kisikil, often translated as maiden. But meanings here aren't just semantic, they're layered with ritual, with coded intent. And here's your quirky fact. Some temple priestesses, particularly those of Ishtar, were believed to have prophetic powers, not just fortune-telling, but full-on trance visions, dream, channeling, even possession by the goddess herself. The process sometimes involved erotic elements, music, incense, and chanting designed to open the body to divine influence. Whether this meant literal sex is again up for debate, but whatever it was, it scared some and entranced others. Kings sometimes consulted these women before battles, and on occasion their advice led to massive policy decisions. So yes, at least for a time, a woman connected to a fertility goddess and standing barefoot in a half-lit room could hold the fate of an empire in her hands. But not every woman in this temple had that kind of influence. Some cooked, some cleaned, some managed the gift offerings, and some, though rarely spoken of, were housed in the backwaters, receiving male visitors who gave silver in exchange for ritual connection. These women weren't mocked, they weren't stoned. They were part of the system, revered by some, ignored by others, but undeniably woven into the spiritual fabric of the city. The red-robed priestess glances at you as she exits, her eyes unreadable. You suddenly feel like you've been peering through a curtain that could vanish at any moment. And maybe it does, because the next time you look around, the temple feels quieter. The music has stopped. The singers have dispersed. Only the flicker of the oil lamps remains, casting long shadows on walls that have seen 1,000 ceremonies. You step back into the sun, blinking. The street feels louder now, more chaotic. Somewhere a baby wails. A dog barks. The spell breaks. And yet, something lingers. The feeling that Babylon's sex workers weren't just selling bodies, they were moving between worlds, between mortal and divine, between honoured and hidden, between power and survival, and somehow they still are. The temple fades behind you like a dream you're not quite sure you had. You blink at the daylight, so the heat hits you full on, thick, dusty, absolutely unapologetic. There's no breeze, not even a teasing breath from the Tigris, and everything smells like damp stone over a ripe fruit and people trying to out-sweat each other. You take a left onto a less polished street where the sacred silk of temple life is stripped away, thread by thread, until you're back in the raw folds of Babylon. And just like that, the divine peels off and reveals something far more human. You duck into a side alley as a procession clatters by. Priests, acolytes, musicians banging cymbals and waving palm fronds like they're trying to scare off the gods instead of summon them. But no one here pays them any mind. They've seen it all before. Processions come and go, so do kings, so do prophets. But this alley? This is permanent. The women who work it know how to stay when kingdoms fall. You stop near a sun-cracked archway, where two women are deep in a negotiation that sounds more like an argument than anything romantic. One is tall, draped in saffron yellow cloth and clearly knows her worth. The other, short, sweating, clutching a pouch, clearly doesn't. You try not to stare, but the woman in yellow catches your eye and throws you a look like, "Want to watch? That'll cost you too." You move on. This street isn't sacred, not even close. There are no temple chants here, no ceremonial oil lamps. This is the other end of the sex work spectrum. The brothels, the back rooms, the alleys soaked with last night's mistakes. And if the temple priestesses could claim divine lineage, these women are scraping their nails along the bricks of survival, with no one watching but each other. One building catches your eye. It's barely more than a cube of stacked mud brick with a wooden sign hanging askew. It has a crude drawing on it. Possibly a woman, possibly a bird, hard to say. You duck your head and step inside. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust to the gloom. Then you see them. 4 women, half-dressed diapuir. Lounging around a low central table with chipped ceramic bowls and a pile of flatbread no one seems interested in eating. A boy, no more than 10, scurries past carrying a jug of water with exaggerated care. This is not a temple annex. This is a brothel. The woman in charge, clearly the madam, raises an eyebrow when she sees you, but doesn't stop you. She's wiping down a clay counter with a rag that's long lost the fight against grime. She's older, with silver streaks in her hair and an expression carved from marble. You nod politely, she ignores you. You sit near the corner listening. One girl complains about a client with breath like fermented fish. Another talks about a merchant who paid in foreign coins and promised to return, he didn't. Another, the youngest, says nothing. She just stares at the wall like it might offer an escape hatch. It doesn't. And here's the kicker. These women probably weren't criminals. In fact, Babylonian law didn't criminalize prostitution outright, but it didn't protect it either. A woman working in this kind of brothel had virtually no legal recourse if a client beat her, robbed her, or refused to pay. She was technically outside the law, not beneath it. That made her vulnerable in all directions. You think of Hammurabi's Code, that towering list of ancient laws where everything from ox theft to eye-poking gets addressed. You'd assume prostitution would be a major topic. Right? Nope, it's barely mentioned. There are laws about marriage, adultery, inheritance, temple workers, but only a couple of vague lines about Harimtu, the independent sex worker. And even those are fuzzy, like the lawmakers couldn't decide whether to condemn them or just keep them off the census. One law does stick out though. If a woman is caught entering a tavern, she may be executed if she's a priestess. Why? Because priestesses weren't supposed to mingle with the public in casual or shameful settings. But here's where the lines blur again. Some taverns doubled as brothels. So were they banning drinking, or sex work, or just the public visibility of women who were supposed to be sacred? Scholars still argue about it. Each theory more complicated than the last. You glance over and notice the madame watching you now. She walks over slowly, sets a cracked bowl in front of you, and drops 2 dates into it like it's a peace offering. "You're not from here," she says, not quite asking. You nod. She sits across from you with a heavy sigh and says, "Most of them weren't either. They came from villages, lost husbands, starved out her farms. Some were given to temples, then left behind. A few ran away from bad men. This is where they end up." You ask her how long she's been doing this. She smiles, and it's not a happy smile. "Since before the flood," she says, "and after, or 2. A silence settles between you, and in that quiet the sounds of the brothel rise. A man laughing from behind a curtain. The clink of bronze coins, the creak of a bed made from rope and regret. Someone lighting a fresh oil lamp, someone crying softly. Now for your quirky fact of the night. There's evidence, though it's rare, that some brothels functioned as informal banks. That's right. A few tablets reference madames who stored clients' money, or even lent silver to merchants. It's not clear if this was legal, but it was practical. When people trust you with their bodies, they sometimes trust you with their coins too, especially when you're discreet and have dirt on everyone. The madam leans in slightly. "People think we're dirty," she says. "But you know who brings the real filth? The ones who wear robes and speak to gods? They're the ones who leave blood on the sheets and silver under the mat and say it's all part of the ritual." You thank her quietly. She waves you off. "Don't thank me, just remember." As you stand to leave, you feel the weight of it all pressing against your ribs. The temple's divine theatrics, the alley's cold transactions, the women whose names history didn't bother to record. Priestess or courtesan, sacred or streetwise, it was always someone else's hand writing the story. Outside, the sun is high, casting harsh light on the cracked street. The red cloth still hangs from the doorway. The sign with the bird or woman is still crooked, but now you see it differently, less as a place of sin and more as a kind of archive, a place where truth survives, scribbled not in cuneiform but in the hard lines around a woman's eyes, and Babylon keeps turning. By midday, the light in Babylon turns white hot, like the gods are holding a magnifying glass over the city just to watch it sweat. The air tastes metallic and your feet ache. Sore from the uneven paving stones and your stubborn insistence on not collapsing, but still you walk, because there's something else you need to see. Something even the temples and brothels don't fully capture. You've heard whispers, scraps of gossip carried on the wind with the scent of grilled onions and crushed herbs. There's a darker part of the city, past the merchant lanes and grain markets, where the women no one remembers live in rooms no one wants to find. You reach it by crossing through a courtyard where goats nibble on garbage and an old man sells lukewarm beer in cracked mugs. Past dye workshops, where your nostrils burn from the stench of boiled indigo and fermented urine, you find a low building leaning against a wall like it's too tired to stand on its own. No signs here, no red cloths, no veils fluttering in doorways, just a silent entry and a lingering sense that you should keep your voice down. You step inside, ducking under the lintel, and suddenly the sound of the city drops away like you've gone underwater. The interior is dim, lit only by slivers of light through holes in the roof. It smells like wet earth, sickness, and something faintly sweet, Maybe old incense, or maybe just the smell of desperation trying to wear perfume. This isn't a brothel. This is something lower, something raw. A woman sits in the corner on a rolled mat, skin the colour of sun-bleached wood. Her eyes flick to you, but she doesn't move. You recognise the look. 1 part warning, 2 parts weariness. She doesn't need to say it. You don't belong here, and she's right. Because this is where the lowest ranked sex workers live. Not in brothels or taverns or temples. Not under the supervision of a madam. These women are on their own. Or worse, under someone's thumb so tightly they've forgotten how to breathe. You take in the room, 5, maybe 6 women. A baby cries in a back room. One girl is passed out, face down on a mat. Her arm is covered in strange markings, scratches, bites, maybe even branding. Another woman squats over a basin, washing a cloth with water so grey it could double as paint. No one talks, no one bothers to pretend. You sit down near the door, trying not to draw attention. Outside you can hear someone yelling drunkenly in slurred Akkadian, and a moment later the door rattles as though he might barge in. He doesn't, but no one inside reacts. They're used to this. They've made themselves small in a world that only notices them when it's convenient. Now here's the thing about Babylon. Its legal and religious systems were elaborate, sure, but they rarely bent far enough to reach the bottom rungs. The elite priestesses had contracts. The brothel workers sometimes had protection. But these women, the ones who worked in alleys, rented single rooms, or slept in shared mats in the back of a baker's storage shed, they had nothing, no paperwork, no rights. No names that made it onto clay. Some were former slaves who had been cast out after their usefulness faded. Others were orphans, war captives, or the discarded daughters of families who couldn't afford to feed them. The Babylonian system, with all its famed bureaucracy, had no office for mercy. If you slipped through the cracks, you simply fell, and you stayed fallen. And here's a fact you probably didn't want to know, but now you do. Babylonian documents occasionally mention women of the street in the same breath as livestock. Not metaphorically, literally. In trade agreements. There are clay tablets where a man lists his assets, and right between 2 oxen and 1 house is a harem-2 woman, no name given, just another possession. You spot a small oil lamp in the corner shaped like a lion, its mouth the spout for the flame. It's surprisingly delicate, chipped along the edges but still elegant. It looks out of place here. Like it belonged in a nicer part of the city. Maybe one of the women stole it. Or maybe someone left it behind in a hurry, forgotten like everything else. You hear a cough from the next room. Wet, persistent, worrying. One of the women gets up and disappears into the back, returning with a small pot of herbs mashed into a sticky black paste. She presses it into the hands of the coughing woman, who nods but doesn't thank her. It's just habit now. Survival here doesn't come with gratitude. Now for your quirky fact, Babylon had a medical class, real physicians who studied tablets and mixed potions, but most of them weren't treating women like this. Instead, the poor relied on wise women, unofficial healers who passed down recipes for salves, poultices and teas that probably worked just enough to keep hope alive. Some of them even doubled as midwives and herbalists. Others were former sex workers themselves. Too old or too injured to keep working, but still useful with a sharp blade or a clean rag. And here's the scholarly debate of the day. Were these low-status women considered part of the same system as temple or brothel prostitutes, or were they in a class all their own? Some argue that Babylonian society recognised degrees of sex work and understood the difference between a sacred prostitute and a street woman. Others say no, that to the men in power a sex worker was a sex worker. And the only thing that changed was how much you paid. The woman in the corner finally speaks. Her voice is soft, dry like wind over stone. "You looking for someone?" she asks. You shake your head. She watches you for a long moment, then shrugs. Doesn't matter. They come here looking for comfort. They leave when they run out of silver, or they don't leave at all. You glance toward the back room. The crying has stopped. The silence is worse. You want to ask why they stay here. Why not run? Why not find work in a tavern or beg near the temples? But you know the answer already. Running costs energy. Starting over costs luck. And Babylon isn't kind to the unlucky. So they stay. You stand slowly, careful not to startle anyone. No one stops you. The woman in the corner nods once, then turns her gaze back to the dirt floor. You step out into the blinding sun and immediately feel the shift in temperature, in sound, in reality. The city moves on, oblivious. A merchant passes by shouting about figs, a donkey groans, a child laughs, and behind you the door closes again, swallowing the women back into silence. As you walk away, you realise something. Babylon loved its walls. It built them high and thick, layered with rules and rites and rituals, but none of them were ever built to protect these women. They were the mortar that held the city together, and yet somehow they were the part most easily washed away by time. But here, for now, they still exist. Quietly, stubbornly, in rooms no one wants to find, and the next morning the air carries something new, something sharper, spicier. You catch it as you pass the marketplace, past the barley vendors and fishmongers shouting prices like it's a sport. It trails behind a pair of women walking in perfect rhythm, veils tucked tightly and sandals clapping with practiced confidence. That smell, faint rose oil, cinnamon, and something a little musky, grabs you by the nose and tugs you off course. You follow it, naturally. It leads you through the market, past booths lined with pottery, linen, and bronze trinkets. But you're not here for kitchenware or spare chariot parts. You're looking for what Babylon's women knew better than most: the invisible weapons and the silent armour. Welcome to the world of love spells, amulets, and perfumes, the real arsenal of a prostitute. You enter a cramped stall sandwiched between a date seller and a woman who carves tiny lion statues from soapstone. Inside, it's darker and full of mystery. Shelves overflow with vials of oil, clay bowls painted with sigils, dried herbs in hanging bundles, and feathers from birds you've never seen before. A woman stands behind the table, eyes lined thick with black coal, her fingers stained orange from crushed roots. She doesn't greet you. She knows why you're here. This, you realise, is not a beauty stand. This is where Babylon's sex workers came when they wanted to gain an edge on clients, rivals, even fate itself. You pick up a small jar unlabelled. She watches. "That one," she says, "is for making someone forget his wife's name." You blink. She smirks. 2 drops on your wrist, not more, or he won't remember his own. This was a real part of life for many women in Babylon, especially those in sex work. Appearance was important, sure, but charm, influence, control, those were sacred arts, and women like this one, the perfumers, the midwives, the hedge witches, were the ones teaching it. You glance at a bundle of dried flowers tied with red thread. The woman notices. Crushed lotus mixed with palm wine and red ochre. You write his name on a tablet, press it into the mixture, burn it under a full moon. "He'll dream of you for 7 nights, she taps her temple. "Then he comes." You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. "If it doesn't work, at least your room will smell good." Now here's the historical thread. Love spells were absolutely a thing in ancient Mesopotamia. Tablets have been uncovered with incantations that read like cosmic pickup lines. There were prayers to Inanna, Ishtar, and other deities asking for affection, passion, or revenge. Some were surprisingly aggressive. "Bind his loins, cloud his judgment, open his silver pouch to me and none other." Others were more poetic, invoking stars, rivers, and sacred animals. And it wasn't all verbal. Objects mattered too. Amulets shaped like fertility symbols, beads etched with tiny cuneiform wishes, rings engraved with protective invocations. These were often worn by prostitutes, either to attract good clients or ward off bad ones. Some were hidden in hair, others sewn into clothes or tied around ankles with string soaked in oil. You reach for a necklace carved from lapis lazuli, a stone associated with royalty and divinity. The shopkeeper stops you. "That one's dangerous. It belonged to a Kadishtu, temple woman, used it in her rituals." You ask what kind. She leans in. "The kind that left men speaking in tongues, literally." You put it back. Now for your fringe fact. Some Babylonian prostitutes, especially those connected to temples, were trained in basic pharmacology, not just perfume blending, but real chemical knowledge, mixing herbs to sedate, to excite, to heal, and sometimes to harm. One plant, cashew, shows up often in tablets. Used in love charms, it had a bitter taste and a strong aroma. It was also mildly toxic in large doses, useful if a client got too rough, or refused to pay. Of course, not every woman could afford these potions or charms. That's where community came in. Among the brothels and shared rooms, knowledge was passed from one to another like recipes. You imagine a group of women sitting together at dusk, braiding hair, whispering dosages, showing how to grind seeds just fine enough to slip into wine. Magic wasn't just power, it was sisterhood. And here's your scholarly debate. Were these spells seen as genuine religious rituals or folk nonsense? Some argue that since many spells invoke major deities, they were likely respected, at least in a half-serious way. Others think they were low-status magic, what elites mocked but secretly used. The truth probably depends on who's doing the asking and who's doing the enchanting, but what's certain is that these women believed in it, or needed to. You glance around the shop again. A thin tablet leans against the wall, cracked and worn. You step closer. It's etched with a spell in Sumerian. As the river bends to the reeds, so shall his path bend to me. Let his eyes see only my doorway. Let his hands forget all others. It's beautiful, oddly timeless. You think about the women you've seen, the ones laughing over bread, the ones crying behind curtains, the ones staring blankly at mud walls. How many of them whispered these lines under their breath before a long night? The shopkeeper wraps a small vial in cloth and hands it to a woman behind you, who drops 2 bronze coins on the table. They exchange no words, just a look, like one soldier nodding to a dumb. You leave the stall slowly, back into the blinding Babylonian heat, and the world rushes in again, noisy, bright, chaotic, but you carry the scent of that place with you now, stuck in your hair and your memory. You start to notice how many women in the street wear similar oils or hold beads between their fingers, or tuck tiny charms beneath their belts. They're not just walking through the city, they're walking through it armoured, spellbound, perfumed and prepared. Because when you live in a world where your body is currency, magic becomes both a shield and a scalpel. And in Babylon, every woman you pass might be carrying a spell in her sleeve and a prayer on her lips, just in case the night turns ugly, or just in case the gods are listening. The city changes when you follow someone through it, not with purpose, but with quiet observation. That's what you're doing now, shadowing a woman as she moves through the city's twisting veins with practiced ease. She doesn't see you, or maybe she does and just doesn't care. Either way, you're invisible, drifting behind her like smoke from one of the oil lamps you probably lit the night before. Her hair is bound high in a tight knot, strands escaping in the humidity. Her robe is loose but clean, dyed a faded red that catches the eye without screaming for it. She is neither priestess nor noblewoman. She's a harimtu, and today you're going to follow her from sunrise to starlight. She begins in the room she rents above a tavern, where the smell of yeast and sweat never quite clears. It's early, just after dawn, and the streets are still mostly empty save for merchants preparing their stalls and dogs sniffing through last night's trash. The woman you're following, let's call her Luma because she's not going to tell you her real name, opens the shutters of her window, spits into the street and stretches like she owns the sun. Her day starts not with clients but with rituals, not religious ones, though she does whisper a quick word to Ishtar under her breath, but bodily ones. She washes with cold water carried up from the courtyard well, scrubs her skin with coarse salt and lemon peel, brushes her hair with a comb carved from bone. She oils her wrists, lines her eyes, and carefully paints her mouth with red dye crushed from beetles and resin. It's a slow transformation, not into someone else, but into the version of herself that people pay to see. And here's a fact people don't like to admit. Presentation was everything. Babylonian prostitutes, especially the independent ones, understood marketing centuries before the concept had a name. The way they moved, smelled, dressed, even spoke, it was all deliberate. A good harimtu didn't just know how to fake affection. She knew how to create a mood that could convince a man to part with 3 days' wages for an hour he'd regret later and remember forever. Luma eats quickly. Flatbread, an olive, a swig of warm beer. Then she's out the door. Her first stop is the market, where she trades a slice of fish for a handful of dried figs and picks up a fresh linen sash dyed with saffron. She speaks to 3 vendors, laughs with one, ignores the catcalls of a bored baker. Everything is part of the circuit. Her face needs to be seen. Her scent needs to linger. Desire doesn't just appear. It's planted, nurtured. Around mid-morning she sits near the edge of a fountain, weaving flowers into a simple crown. Not for herself, but for a client, a merchant who insists she look like a goddess whenever he visits. She hums a tune you don't recognize. Her bare feet rest on warm stone. A passing priest nods at her. She doesn't nod back. And here's the strange part. She's not hustling, not chasing men. She doesn't call out, doesn't flash a smile unless it's earned. She doesn't need to. She's built a reputation, enough charm to draw interest and enough mystery to keep it. By noon, she's already had 2 clients. One was short and awkward, probably a scribe. The other came in like he owned the palace, left like he couldn't remember his own name. She cleans herself carefully after each visit, ritual washes, perfume, new sash. In Babylon, cleanliness wasn't just hygiene. It was part of the performance, a way to separate one encounter from the next, to protect her sense of self in a world that asked her to be 100 different women before sunset. You follow her into the afternoon, and the rhythm continues. She naps briefly in the shade of a fig tree, then helps a girl from the tavern carry a jug up the stairs. She shares a slice of melon with another harimtu, and they talk in hushed tones about a nobleman's wife who's been asking questions. There's danger in that kind of gossip, but also opportunity. The wife may want revenge, or discretion, or maybe she wants a meeting of her own. Now for your quirky fact, some Babylonian prostitutes also served as intermediaries between wealthy women and the world. Think of them as ancient fixers. Want your husband cursed? Your sister's lover seduced? Your father's will altered before it's pressed into clay? You don't do it yourself. You pay someone like Luma, who has access to the rooms where secrets are born. By evening, the city shifts again. Lamps are lit, curtains are drawn, music begins to drift from the taverns and rooftops. Luma prepares for her 3rd client of the day, a foreign merchant, likely Phoenician, judging by the trinkets on his robe. She doesn't like him, that much is clear. But she puts on the charm anyway, slipping into the room with a sway in her hips and a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. You wait outside, listening to the sounds of the city throb like a heartbeat. Drums from a nearby party, shouting from a drunk who lost his sandals. Laughter from a group of children chasing a stray chicken down the street. Normal Babylon things. When Luma reappears, her eyes are harder. She doesn't speak, just walks past you into the tavern, where she drops 3 silver shekels into the madam's hand, grabs a mug of beer, and downs it in one long pull. She leans against the wall, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "One more," she mutters. "Then I'm done." And here's your scholarly debate for the night. Some researchers believe that prostitutes like Luma weren't just tolerated in Babylon. They were integrated into the city's economic structure. Others argue they lived on the fringe, barely scraping by, seen as necessary evils. The truth likely lives in the space between. Luma exists in that space, both visible and invisible, central and peripheral, essential and expendable. As night deepens, she retreats to her room. No fanfare. No candlelight vigil, just tired feet and sore muscles. She closes the shutters, washes again, peels off her painted face and lies down on the mat. No prayers this time, just silence. And in that silence you finally understand something. A day in her sandals isn't about sex. It's about control. Control of the room, of the transaction, of how her story is told, if it's told at all. And she, tired, fierce, perfumed, unrecorded, is the only one writing it. Night doesn't fall in Babylon. It rolls in like hot tar. Thick, slow and sticky, clinging to skin and story, the moon hangs heavy and bloated above the rooftops, casting a pearly sheen on the river's surface. You're standing on a balcony above the street of cooks, where roasted onions and sizzling goat fat perfume the air. You hear a tambourine rattle somewhere to your left, then a burst of laughter, drunk and ragged. Someone's party has started early. That's your cue. Because tonight, you've been invited kind of to a Babylonian bachelor party. Not the kind with matching robes and awkward toasts, but the old school kind, part ritual, part celebration, part social hazard. You follow the sound through the streets like a moth to music, your sandals tapping against uneven flagstones until you reach a house with its door wide open and a roaring fire pit in the courtyard. Inside, chaos, heat, wine, and men, so many men. The groom sits at the centre, barely older than 20, with a gold-threaded sash draped across one shoulder and a wide grin like he's already half immortal. He's surrounded by friends, cousins, and a few already loose acquaintances who just want free beer and the chance to slap someone on the back with mock sincerity. The food is piled high, stuffed flatbreads, boiled lentils, grilled pigeon, and the drink is flowing faster than it should. But that's not why you're here. The women are coming. That's the main event. Not temple priestesses or discreet courtesans, but a very specific kind of performance group, prostitutes hired to entertain the groom and his friends, maybe with music and dance, maybe with something more. And here they come, 4 of them. wrapped in veils, jewellery chiming on their ankles. You recognise one. It's Luma. She catches your eye barely, then looks away. Her role tonight is different. Not private, not intimate. This is spectacle. This is business. The crowd shifts as the women enter. Some men whistle. One spills his drink in his hurry to sit straighter. Even the groom leans forward, cheeks flushed and eyes wide. The oldest of the women steps forward and starts to sing, not in a temple dialect, not in Sumerian chant, but in street Akkadian, rhythmic and teasing. Tonight he drinks, tomorrow he's owned, by wife, by fate, by promises groaned. So let him dance, let him foul, before the curtain drops on it all. The crowd loves it. They clap along, poorly but enthusiastically, as the women begin to move, hips swaying in time to a beat tapped out on a small drum. It's not striptease. It's more layered than that, half humour, half mock ritual. They're not just here to arouse. They are here to make the groom laugh, blush, squirm, maybe to test his resolve, maybe to remind him what he's giving up. Here's your historical fact of the night. Pre-marriage rituals in Babylon are often loaded with symbolic gestures, some serious, some absurd. In wealthier circles, the groom might undergo purification rituals or make sacrifices to the gods of fertility. In more secular settings, the goal was just to celebrate. And for some, that meant inviting women from brothels or taverns to attend the final night of bachelorhood. It wasn't considered cheating exactly, not if the woman was paid, not if it wasn't repeated, but it walked a fine line. You watch as the mood starts to shift, the jokes become louder, the touches a bit bolder. One of the men, probably a cousin, definitely drunk, grabs at one of the women's wrists. She twists away smoothly, not angry, just efficient. It's not her first time in a room like this. But the tension lingers. The madam who brought them, a sharp-eyed and side-eyed woman standing in the corner like a shadow, steps forward and says something low in Akkadian. The man sulks. The party resumes. And now for your fringe fact. There's evidence of written contracts between brothels and wealthy families for services rendered at pre-wedding gatherings. These weren't just casual arrangements. They included terms like no touching without consent, compensation for broken items, and even clauses about what would happen if a client fell in love with a performer. Spoiler alert, it rarely ended well. Luma, meanwhile, dances near the groom with a mischievous half smile. She places a flower crown on his head and says something you can't hear. He laughs too loudly, trying not to stare at her mouth. He fails, he looks like he's trying to memorize her face. She notices, and just as quickly she steps away. There's a shift now. The women retreat toward the door, the music softens, and the groom's friend starts slapping him on the back, offering the kind of advice that begins with "never tell her," and ends with "or you'll be sleeping with the pigs." He's glowing, sweaty, tired, already half regretting tomorrow. You follow the women as they exit, their anklets jingling like bells calling them home. Once they're a block away, the show drops, the veils come off, the posture softens. Luma sighs, pulls her sandals off and carries them by the straps. "That guy's going to be miserable by next summer," she mutters to no one. You ask if she ever gets sick of it, playing goddess for men who think it's real. She shrugs. "I play it because I get paid. They believe it because they want to." You walk with them for a while, the streets now quieter, filled only with the rustle of wind and the occasional shout from someone still trying to find their way home. One of the younger girls giggles. "He tried to kiss me," she says. "He closed his eyes. I moved." They all laugh. And here's the debate of the night. Some scholars believe these performances were empowering moments where sex workers controlled the room, dictated the mood, shaped the fantasy. Others argue the opposite, that they were performative cages, reinforcing a system that depended on women's constant appeasement of men. The truth again is somewhere in the dance. As they disappear into the maze of side streets, you stand for a moment, watching the city breathe. Babylon isn't a simple place. Nothing here is purely sacred or purely sinful, not even the parties. Especially not the parties. The groom will wake up tomorrow with a headache and a wife. The women will wake up, rinse off the night and do it again. The roles will reset. But the story doesn't stop. And you, lucky ghost that you are, keep moving forward through a city that never forgets, even if it pretends to. You wake to the sound of shouting, real angry shouting, not the market kind or the half-drunk, half-laughing kind that echoes through the streets most mornings. This is sharper, more urgent. You roll off the mat in the tiny room you've borrowed for the night and peek through the shutter. A small crowd has gathered near the edge of the grain market. forming that familiar kind of circle people only make when someone's in trouble and everyone wants to see it happen. You throw on your tunic and head down, the stone steps still cool beneath your feet. The sun's only just up, but already the day is heating. You elbow through the crowd carefully until you spot what's caused the commotion. A woman, maybe 30, maybe 50, it's hard to tell with the dust on her face, is being dragged by her arm by a man in a wine-coloured robe. He's well-fed, red-faced, holding a broken tablet in his other hand. Behind him, a guard from the city watch looks bored. "Thief," the man spits. "She took my silver and ran." The woman doesn't say a word. Her robe is torn, one sandal is missing. Her hands shake, but her mouth is a straight, stubborn line. You recognise the look. You've seen it in brothels and backrooms and temple courtyards. It's the look of someone who knows the outcome before the performance starts. Still she stands. Someone mutters, "She's a harem too," like it's both an explanation and a sentence. And just like that, the crowd changes. Where before there was curiosity, now there's dismissal. Oh, just a prostitute. And here we are, tonight's story, the economics of sex in Babylon, where bodies were currency, contracts were the king, and silver, the kind that jingles in a pouch, always had the last word. The guard finally steps forward, voice disinterested. "Did she owe you money?" "No," the man snaps. "I paid her 2 shekels. She promised the night." "And?" "She left after 1 hour. She tricked me." The guard shrugs. "She gave you something for the silver?" The man flinches. "She didn't give me enough." Now here's a messy truth. Babylon's sex economy wasn't just transactional. It was contractual, formal. If you were lucky or high-ranking, your work came with documents, written agreements sealed in wax or clay, witnessed and filed. But most harem, too, they worked by verbal arrangement, which meant if a man complained. And he had the right friends. Suddenly her words meant nothing, but it didn't stop at payment. Babylon had a layered structure when it came to prostitution's economics. The top tier, women associated with temples, sometimes paid with rations or donations, sometimes allowed to collect silver on behalf of the temple. Below that, courtesans, often trained in music or dance, with a regular clientele and the kind of charm that made men hand over whole pouches just to sit near them. Then you had brothel workers, paid per visit, often under the watch of a madam who took a cut. And finally, the street-level women, paid in silver, food, clothing, whatever the client could offer. No contracts, no protection. The woman in the square, she's somewhere between the 3rd and 4th tier, not a beggar, but not protected either. The guard tells the man to take it to the scribes if he wants compensation. Unless, he says dryly, you want to accuse her of theft, then you'll need proof. A witness, a seal. The man curses and throws the broken tablet at her feet. "I'll be back," he says, and storms off. The crowd dissolves. The woman doesn't move. You approach slowly and hand her the missing sandal. She takes it without looking at you. "Did you steal from him?" you ask low. She huffs. "I charged him 2 shekels. He wanted 6 shekels of work." You can't help but smile. That's the unrecorded tax of being a woman in this trade. You're always either too expensive or not enough. And here's your historical core for the night. Babylon had a complex legal system when it came to labour and trade, but sex work always hovered in the margins. Technically, it was legal, but without a contract or a temple tie, you had no standing. If a dispute arose, it often came down to reputation, and a man's word, especially if he was literate, usually weighed more. You walk with her toward the tavern district. Along the way, she tells you about the price of things. A fresh tunic? 5 shekels? A night in a shared room? 1 shekel, maybe 2 if it's clean. Wine, figs, incense, another 1 or 2. You want to keep your perfume stocked and your sandals from falling apart? That's 10 shekels a week. How much do you make? Some nights none, some nights 8. Depends on who wants what and how drunk they are when they want it. You pass a wall lined with graffiti. Crudely drawn figures, symbols of Ishtar, slogans scratched by bored scribes or angry lovers. One says, "Beltane is the best for 1 silver." Another, more philosophical, "Silver buys warmth, not love." She scoffs at that one. "It buys food," she says. "That's enough." Now for your fringe fact. In some parts of Babylon, prostitutes were taxed. Not officially, but informally. Forced to pay tavern owners, guards, even temple stewards just for operating. There are mentions in tablets of women owing protection silver to men who clearly weren't offering much protection at all. It was a racket disguised as rent, and the smarter women kept hidden coin pouches stitched into their robes or buried in clay jars near their sleeping mats. She stops at a well and pulls up water with a chipped jug, drinks deeply, then rinses her hands. Her fingers are rough. A scratch across her forearm is beginning to scar. Ever think about leaving, you ask? Where to, she replies. Every city has men, every city has silver. Only the prices change. And here's your scholarly debate. Was Babylon's sex economy empowering or exploitative? Some argue it gave women financial independence in a male-dominated society. Others point to the lack of real protection, the risk of violence, and the way women could be bought, sold, or discarded with nothing more than a thumbprint on clay. It wasn't black and white. Nothing here is. You walk the last few steps with her. She thanks you with a nod and disappears into the back entrance of a building that smells like oil and cheap ale. Her day will start again tonight. So will the calculations, the choices, the risks, and Babylon keeps counting shekels, promises, debts unpaid. You pause outside, hand resting on the warm wall, and realise that behind every transaction there's a story. Behind every story a body, and behind every body a woman trying to keep just enough silver to stay alive until morning. The next day brings no relief from the heat. Babylon feels like it's been placed inside a clay oven and left to bake. The wind, when it comes, is warm and gritty, pushing dust into your eyes and under your tongue. But the city keeps moving, always, and you move with it, drawn today toward the western edge, where the houses are bigger, the doors are thicker, and the women behind them are supposedly untouchable. You've spent your nights wandering the alleys of Harem II and temple courtyards, but now it's time to press into the brittle space where husbands, wives, and prostitutes try to coexist. Spoiler. It's awkward. You don't have to go far before you notice the shift. Here the bricks are cleaner, the shadows deeper. Water flows more freely from rooftop spouts. The walls are higher, not to keep invaders out, but to keep secrets in. You pass a woman carrying a basket of dates, a servant trailing behind. Her robe is thick, dyed deep indigo, and her veil covers everything but her eyes. She doesn't look at you, she's not supposed to. Her glance belongs only to her husband, on paper anyway. This is the neighbourhood of the Marisu, the married woman, and here's where things get delicate. The Babylonian marriage contract was less a love letter and more a small novel. These weren't casual unions, they were legally binding, financially structured, deeply transactional arrangements that often included a bride price, dowry clauses, fertility terms, and yes, a section about other women. Because in this city of gods and goats, you could be married and still legally spend time with prostitutes. You just couldn't marry them too, unless you got very creative. You stop by a small courtyard where two women, both veiled, are gossiping over a clay tablet. One of them reads aloud, snorting between words. You can't catch every line, but you hear silver necklace or second wife and something that sounds like illegitimate sons. They're not reading a religious scroll, they're reading someone's court record. Apparently the wife of a merchant caught him giving jewellery to a harem II he'd been seeing on the side. Not unusual, but the problem wasn't the gift. It was that he failed to document it. That's right, gifting your mistress wasn't illegal. It just had to be accounted for. Everything had to be accounted for. And here's your historical truth. Babylonian men could legally sleep with prostitutes, concubines, even slaves, without violating marriage law, as long as the relationships remained non-threatening to the legal wife's status. But if a man began favouring a prostitute financially or emotionally, or worse, tried to elevate her socially, things got complicated, and Babylonian wives were not powerless. Marriage contracts sometimes included clauses protecting the wife's position in the household. If her husband brought another woman into the home without permission, the wife could appeal to the courts. In some cases, she could even initiate a divorce, though she risked losing her dowry if the judge wasn't sympathetic. Still, it's clear. Babylonian women were not meek shadows in their husbands' lives. They read, they petitioned, they remembered receipts. Now for your quirky fact of the day. In some households, especially wealthy ones, the wife and the prostitute may have actually met. Imagine that. A man pays a harem II regularly, buys her gifts, maybe even sneaks her into the city festival, and his wife finds out. But instead of a screaming match, the wife writes a letter. Literally, on clay. There are surviving tablets where wives scold other women, not in person, but through scribed messages. One says, If you continue to speak to my husband, I will bring your name before the temple. Another, more restrained. You are not of our house. Remember your station. So polite. So spicy. You pass by a house with a thick curtain drawn across the doorway. A servant waves a fan just inside. The woman of the house sits near the threshold embroidering something you can't see. Her fingers move fast, her eyes flicking up occasionally. You nod. She nods back, just barely. And then she speaks. Are you the one asking about the women? You pause. Everyone's heard, she adds, even those of us behind the walls. You approach, careful. She gestures to a stool. Doesn't look at you again. Let me guess, she says. You think we're enemies, wives and harem too, as if we're always fighting over some man like scraps off a temple table. You say nothing. She continues stitching. But let me tell you something, she says. If a man's going to the brothels, it's because he wants something he's not brave enough to ask me for. That's not her fault. That's his. It's a startling level of honesty, and you can't help but respect it. She sighs and sets her work aside. Do I hate them? Sometimes. Do I envy them? Sometimes. They don't have to play the long game. They don't have to bear sons or attend endless ceremonies or pretend to admire a husband who snores and forgets their birthday. But I have my name on the land tablet. I have my signature on the merchant deal. That's power too. Here's your scholarly debate. Were Babylonian wives truly empowered or just relatively better off than prostitutes and concubines? Some argue that women in elite marriages had significant autonomy, owning property, running businesses, managing household slaves. Others point out that all of that was contingent on male permission, and still locked inside the expectations of fertility and obedience. Marriage wasn't always safer, it was just differently dangerous. As you rise to leave, the woman picks up her embroidery again. We all live in service, she says, to the gods, to the law, to men, but at least I get a title. At least my children inherit. You nod, thank her, and head back into the city's pulse. The line between wife and harem too isn't a chasm. It's a narrow, dusty road paved with silver, politics, and shared silence. Later that night, you walk past a brothel door and catch sight of Luma. She leans against the frame, tired. She sees you and gives a soft shrug. Married men again, she says. They always say they're different. And maybe some are. But in Babylon, marriage wasn't the end of the story. It was just another kind of contract. The air changes as the sun dips low again, slipping beneath the rooftops and casting long, crooked shadows across the baked stone. Babylon softens at this hour. The harsh angles of the day dissolve into twilight blues and silvers. The city sighs just for a moment, like it's exhaling after another long performance. And you, as always, follow the undercurrent. Tonight, the streets hum differently, slower, more intimate. You're not following a crowd or peering into rituals or observing a performance. Tonight, you're drawn to a quiet place, to the banks of the Euphrates, where life slows and secrets get whispered to the water. This is the place where real exchanges happen. Not silver, not barley, not gifts, but glances, hands, confessions, promises. This is the riverbank rendezvous, and it's exactly as dangerous as it sounds. You keep to the shadows of overhanging trees and broken reeds, watching the figures drift closer, quiet, tentative, like they're not supposed to be here, and maybe they aren't. A man in a dark robe stands alone, arms crossed, feet just kissing the edge of the water. He's pacing, nervous, waiting. Eventually a woman appears, slim, hooded, robes swept high enough to move freely, but not so high to be vulgar. You recognize the posture even before she lifts her veil. It's Luma again. The man rushes forward, not with hunger, but with anxiety. He says her name. No, not her name, her alias, the one she uses with clients who want to believe in fantasy. You're late, he says. She just smiles, soft and slow. I'm always late. You're always early. Their voices drift on the breeze, low and intimate. Not lovers exactly, but close. This isn't a transaction. Or at least not the kind she writes in clay. This is different, messier. You ease closer and listen, not out of rudeness, but because this moment is rare. This man, whoever he is, speaks not like someone buying pleasure, but someone desperate to be heard. He tells her about his wife's silence, his father's disappointment, the pressure of the temple, the loneliness of leadership. He says he thinks about her when he walks through the palace gardens, that he dreams of her hair. And she listens. She doesn't interrupt, doesn't flirt. She just lets the silence stretch when it needs to. You realise now that this too is part of her work, not the seduction, not the act, but this, holding space for someone who feels invisible everywhere else. Here's your historical anchor. There are references in Babylonian tablets to relationships that blur the line between client and companion. Some women weren't just hired for sex, they were confidants, regular companions, sometimes even business advisors. One surviving letter from a high-ranking official to a courtesan named Iltani includes a line that reads, "Your counsel is as precious as your company." Translation: she wasn't just a pretty face, she mattered. And here's the flip side. It could also get dangerous, because when men fell in love with women like Luma, things could unravel fast. There were laws to prevent harem too from marrying upper-class men, but loopholes existed. Some tried to buy their favourite woman's freedom. Others moved them into secret apartments. A few tried to rewrite the law entirely, and every time someone, usually the woman, paid the price when it went wrong. Back at the riverbank, Luma finally speaks. "You shouldn't keep coming here," she says gently. The man looks wounded. "Why not?" "You know why." Her voice is quieter now. "You'll leave, and I'll still be here. You'll forget, and I'll still remember." He starts to protest, but she raises a hand. "I like this place," she says. "I don't want it ruined." And just like that, it ends. She turns, walks back into the shadows, and disappears between the palms. The man watches her go, face unreadable. He stands there a moment longer, then heads the other way, back toward whatever life he came from. You linger. The reeds sway gently, brushing against your legs. The water laps softly against the muddy banks. This river has seen everything: wars, feasts, rituals, betrayals, so it's seen tons of secret meetings just like this one. Lovers, liars, confessors, all trying to escape the sharp edges of the city for one night, one moment of softness. And here's your fringe fact. Some harimtu actually preferred these clandestine rendezvous to brothel work. They set their own prices, chose their clients, met under agreed terms. It was riskier, no madame to protect you, no guards to intervene. But the control, the privacy, the illusion of intimacy, that was worth it for some. Still, the risk was real. A woman caught in a compromising position could be accused of adultery, even if her partner wasn't married. Adultery laws in Babylon were brutal, especially for women. Death by drowning was on the table, literally. One recorded punishment reads, "The guilty woman shall be thrown into the river." And yes, some of them actually were. You shiver, not from cold, but from the way truth clings in this air. As you turn to leave, you see something nestled near the base of a tree, a small tablet, partially buried in sand. You brush it off, recognizing it as a love poem etched hastily. Not for the gods, not for the scribes, just for someone else's eyes. Your eyes are the stars above Ishtar's gate. Your hands, cool water in the city's fire. I forget my name when I'm near you. I remember it again when you leave. No signature, no date, just another secret left behind. You slip it back into the sand, because some things, some feelings, some nights are meant to disappear. And in Babylon, the river remembers everything. The heat breaks overnight. Not by much, but enough that the morning feels less like a punishment and more like a cautious truce. The city wakes slowly, stretching into another day of trade, prayer, and negotiation. And as Babylon exhales its first dusty breath of the morning, you head toward a street you've been warned about. Not because it's dangerous, though it is, but because it's tangled with the kind of rules that shift under your feet when you think you've found solid ground. Today's story is about crimes, punishments, and loopholes, and you should know now, there's no happy ending here, only consequences. The street itself looks ordinary enough. Mud brick homes, faded paint, the faint scent of vinegar and ash from yesterday's fires. But the people here move differently, tighter, more alert. You pass a cluster of men playing dice in the shade, one of them with a scar across his cheek that speaks more fluently than cuneiform ever could. A woman walks by carrying a water jug, her veil pulled down low and her arm marked with ink. Not decoration, not fashion, it's a record. She notices your stare and raises an eyebrow. "Don't ask," she says. "You're not from here." She's right, you're not, but you're trying to understand, because in Babylon, Sex work existed in a space that was somehow both accepted and deeply regulated, legal in many forms but still tangled with danger. The kind of danger that creeps in not from what you do, but from who's watching while you do it. Take adultery, for example. In Babylonian law, if a married woman was caught with a man who wasn't her husband, the punishment was severe. Death, often by drowning. But here's the kicker. A married man caught with a prostitute? Not adultery, not illegal. Unless, of course, the prostitute herself was married or temple-bound, or he tried to elevate her status. That's when the rules kicked in. So what counted as a crime? That depended on status. A harimtu could technically sleep with as many men as she wanted. But if one of those men accused her of entrapment, claiming she seduced him under false pretenses, or failed to deliver on a promised act, she could be fined. Or worse, branded as deceitful, a reputation that spread faster than fire and stuck longer than ink. And here's your historical anchor. In Hammurabi's famous code, the one everyone likes to quote for its eye for an eye simplicity, there's a law that states if a woman is accused of impropriety, but there are no witnesses, she must throw herself into the river. If she floats, the gods have spared her. If she drowns, well, case closed. Justice by buoyancy. It sounds absurd until you remember that Babylon's laws weren't always about truth. They were about appearances, order, and divine approval. You step into a narrow courtyard now, where 3 women are scrubbing linens with rough soap and rougher hands. One of them has a scar across her throat, not fresh but recent enough to still change her voice. She nods at you, then gestures to a spot beside her. You sit. New scribes came this week, she says. Started rewriting the temple debt lists. Wiped 3 women clean, added 2 more. You ask why. Favoritism, bribery, maybe someone owed a favour. She shrugs. There's always a reason. Never a fair one. That's the other thing about Babylon. Loopholes were everywhere. If a prostitute was arrested for theft, she could avoid prison by declaring temple service, assuming the temple agreed. If she was accused of assaulting a client, she might claim in self-defense, but only if she could prove the client wasn't protected. That meant married, titled, or connected. The higher up the ladder, the harder the fall. Now for your fringe fact, there was a punishment in Babylon known as ritual shaving. If a woman, particularly one accused of violating temple purity laws, was found guilty, her hair would be shaved off in public. It wasn't just humiliation, it was erasure. Hair was status, beauty, protection. To be shaved was to be made vulnerable, marked, exposed. A walking warning sign. Some women wore wigs after, others didn't bother. And it wasn't just the women who faced these punishments, men too could be fined, whipped, or imprisoned. But here's the catch, their offences had to disrupt the system. Not morality, not modesty, but the system. A man who got too violent and killed a prostitute in a brothel might be punished, not for murder, but for damaging property. If she belonged to a madam, or was under contract, he owed silver. She was independent. Good luck finding a witness who'd speak for her. That brings us to a debate scholars love to gnaw on like old bones. Was Babylon's legal system truly harsh by ancient standards, or just well documented? Some argue it was rigid but fair, providing guidelines for almost every scenario. Others believe it was performative, favouring the powerful and masking its biases with the illusion of order. The truth probably sat somewhere on a clay tablet, lost in the dirt or smashed under a conquering boot. Back in the courtyard, one of the women pulls out a worn tablet from a leather pouch. She shows you the markings, a contract for services rendered. It's short, written in quick strokes, but there's a seal at the bottom. Client tried to refuse payment, she says. Said I wasn't worth it. I showed him this, she smirks. He paid. The tablet is her shield. Not perfect, not divine, but better than nothing. As the sun rises higher, casting hard light across the courtyard, the women stand, stretch, and gather their things. Another day, another round of games played on uneven ground. You walk with them a while past the taverns and the stalls, past a mural of Ishtar in faded paint, her wings chipped, her eyes still defiant. And as you pass into another street, you see a woman sitting alone, rubbing a scarred wrist. You don't know her name. You don't need to, she's part of this web now, threaded between law and chaos, surviving not because the rules make sense, but because she knows how to twist them just enough to stay alive. Babylon's laws were many, but its loopholes, those were infinite. You don't mean to end up in the healer's quarter. It just sort of happens, the way all the best discoveries do, by accident, by wandering too far down a quiet street and realising you're suddenly surrounded by things that hum with purpose. No shouting vendors here, no children chasing chickens, no taverns spilling over with wine-soaked laughter. Just small clay buildings with symbols etched above their doors, stars, hands, crescents, each marking a different kind of knowledge. And the smell. You notice it before anything else. Crushed herbs, boiled roots, dried blood, something sharp like copper and mint. This is a different Babylon, a quieter one. And tonight, it opens a door to something rarely spoken of in the grand histories: healers, midwives, and secret abortions. You enter a low building tucked behind a fig tree, ducking under a faded linen curtain. Inside, the light is soft, filtered through thin fabric over the windows. A woman in her 40s is grinding something in a clay bowl. Seeds, roots, bits of bark. She doesn't look up when you arrive. "You need something for sleep or something for pain?" she asks, matter of fact. You tell her neither, that you're just curious. Now she looks up. Curious people usually come limping in with regrets. She tilts her head, then gestures to a mat. "Sit." Then. Her name is Damkina. Not her birth name, she says, but the one she uses in this work. It's easier that way. She is not a priestess, not a registered physician, but she is known. And in Babylon, that's enough. She tells you her morning began with a delivery. "Third baby breach," she says, as she drops leaves into hot water. "Had to turn it inside her, almost broke her pelvis. But the boy came out screaming. That's the best sound there is." You listen as she works. On a shelf nearby are dozens of small pots labelled in cuneiform shorthand. Salves for cuts, powders for fevers, tinctures for coughing children. Everything smells like dirt and healing and hard choices, but this is only part of what she does. After a while she says, "You're not really here about the babies, though." You don't answer. She doesn't wait for one. You want to know what happens when a woman doesn't want to bring life into this world, when the body says no, or the situation says no, or the silver isn't there. You nod, and she continues. "There are plants," she says, "some gentle, some violent. If caught early, a simple tea might work. Crushed rue, pennyroyal, soaked barley mixed with date syrup. The womb lets go quietly, but if it's later..." She trails off, then gestures toward the back room. "There are tools and prayers. Here's your historical truth for the night. Abortion existed in Babylon. It wasn't always called that, it didn't have a single word, and it wasn't always written down, but it happened. It had to. In a city where prostitution was common, and contraception was unreliable at best, women needed options, and so in the back rooms of healers and the corners of temples they found them. Was it legal? That's murky. Babylon's legal codes mention miscarriage and fetus loss, but mostly in terms of male property. If a man's wife miscarried because of assault, the assailant owed the husband silver. If a slave miscarried, the fine was lower. But what about a woman choosing to end a pregnancy? There's almost nothing written. Maybe it was taboo. Maybe it was just too common to record. Damkina doesn't need the law to do her work. She learned from her mother, who learned from hers. It's not about right or wrong, she says. It's about need and timing and making sure she leaves with more than just a bleeding womb. You ask who comes to her. All kinds, she says. Temple girls, rich men's daughters, street workers, even wives, especially wives. She chuckles softly. They always say it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. I tell them the body makes no mistakes, but Babylon does. Now for your fringe fact. Some clay tablets include recipes for what we would now call contraceptives or abortifacients. One blend includes honey, mashed date pits, and wool soaked in cedar oil, inserted vaginally to harden the womb or dry the seed. Another recommends a mixture of pomegranate rind and salt, which historians believe had mild estrogenic effects. Did they work? Possibly, sometimes. At least enough to keep the knowledge alive for generations. Damkina disappears into the back and returns with a bundle wrapped in linen. She opens it slowly, revealing carved bone instruments smooth and worn from use. Hooks, spoons, flat paddles. You shudder, bchisik, not from fear, but from the weight of how many stories they must carry. I only use these when there's no other way, she says. The goal is always less pain, less risk, but sometimes there's no choice. And here's your scholarly debate of the night. Were women like Damkina respected or feared? Some argue they were crucial, even revered. Midwives and healers who served gods like Gula, the goddess of healing. Others believe they operated in the shadows, tolerated but not trusted. Their knowledge seen as both sacred and dangerous. There's evidence for both. What's clear is that Babylon's official medicine was male-dominated, but the city's real care, the blood, the birth, the body, was managed by women. You hear a soft knock at the door. Damkina glances at you, then calls, "Come in!" A young girl enters, eyes wide, hands shaking. She can't be more than 16. She doesn't speak. She just clutches her stomach and bites her lip. Damkina's face softens. She motions toward the back. "Wait here," she says to you. You do, for a long time. Eventually the girl emerges, slower but steadier. Her eyes find yours for just a second. Not ashamed, not proud, just relieved. She leaves without a word. Damkina returns, washing her hands in a clay basin. She looks tired but satisfied. "She came before it was too late," she says. "She'll be all right." You thank her, and she shrugs. "Don't thank me. Thank the old women who whispered their recipes into the firelight long before I was born." Outside, the light has shifted again. The streets are louder, the crowd thicker. But for a moment, you stay still, because somewhere behind that fig tree a secret was tended. Not buried, not erased, just protected, as it has been for centuries. And in Babylon, sometimes the bravest thing a woman could do was walk through a healer's door and ask for help before the city could judge her for needing it. You return to the heart of the city, feet dragging, head full of too many images, blood, herbs, whispered prayers, and realize you need a moment to breathe. Just one. Babylon doesn't give those freely, but it does offer places to pause if you know where to look. So you drift toward the center again, past the scribe's quarter, past the smell of drying papyrus, and the quiet tap-tap-tap of styluses on clay. You're headed for a place that's loomed over the last few days like a giant, silent witness, the ziggurat. It rises in levels, tier after tier of mud, brick and shadow, crowned with a shrine to pierce the very sky. Etemenanki, they call it. The foundation of heaven and earth. And there's no exaggeration in the name, it's massive, monstrous even. Each level a city in itself, stacked like stairways to a god who's either watching or sleeping. No one's quite sure, but tonight you're not climbing. You're walking the base, the foundation, where the temple walls blend into the streets and where the dividing line between sacred space and everyday life turns fuzzy. Because this is where the women of Babylon, particularly the prostitutes, live in the shadow of the ziggurat, quite literally and metaphorically. You find a small plaza tucked beside one of the temple storehouses. There's a clay bench, a broken fountain, and a fig tree that might be older than half the city. Sitting beneath it is a woman whose robe is so pale it's nearly white, faded from sun and use. She's older than most you've seen in this line of work, 40, maybe 50, but carries herself with a calm you've only seen in temple priests or well-fed cats. She nods when you approach. "You're the one asking questions," she says. You nod back. "And you're the one who knows the answers?" She smiles like she's heard better lines. "I used to be Kadishtu," she says, "temple woman. Not the kind that chants hymns, the other kind." You sit beside her, grateful for the fig tree's shade. She offers you a piece of dried plum, and you both chew in silence for a moment before she starts to talk. "People think being near the ziggurat meant we were holy," she says, "that our work was blessed, but mostly it just meant we were watched." She gestures toward the temple walls. Men came here looking for something more than pleasure. They wanted sanctioned pleasure, sacred sin, something they could pay for and not feel guilty about after. And here's your hard historical truth. Babylon's temples weren't just for prayer. They were economic hubs, centers of administration, and, controversially, sites where ritual sex may have occurred. It's debated, of course. Some historians argue there was no such thing as sacred prostitution. Others insist the evidence is there, in temple ledgers, in the writings of Herodotus, in ritual hymns to Ishtar and Inanna. But what's undeniable is that sex and religion were not separate here, not in the way you'd hope. The goddess Ishtar was love and war and fertility and death, and her rituals included all of it. Some women were offered to her service as children. Some entered later as part of contracts, offerings, even bribes. And once you were in, the lines got blurry real fast. The woman beside you pulls out a small bead necklace. It's worn, missing a few pieces. "Used to wear this during the festivals," she says. "Meant I was sanctified. which mostly meant I was allowed to sleep with whoever the priest assigned and pretend it was sacred. She says it flatly, without bitterness, but you hear the steel under the words. Now for your fringe fact. During the New Year's festival, Akitu, the high priest or king, would symbolically marry the goddess. Sometimes this involved ritual sex with a woman representing Ishtar, often a temple prostitute or priestess. Whether the woman had any real choice in the matter, that's the part no one wrote down. She leans forward now, elbows on knees. You want to know what it was like? She asks. You nod. It was theatre, she says. Sacred theatre. You wore the perfumes, sang the chants, laid out the offerings, and opened your legs under the moonlight. And if you were lucky, the man smelled decent and left quietly. If not, you woke up sore and prayed he didn't leave you with the more than bruises. She pauses, then adds, but the worst ones were the ones who fell in love. That catches you off guard. Love, she laughs. Oh yes, they believed in it. Believed we were goddesses or oracles or vessels. They'd bring poems, gifts, promises. Swore they'd buy your freedom, take you away. One even tried to sneak me onto a grain barge headed for Uruk. You know what happened? You shake your head. The guards pulled me off before we left the dock. He got fined. I got whipped. And here's your scholarly debate. Did women like her truly belong to the temple, or were they simply attached by necessity? The word Kadishtu itself is messy, sometimes meaning sacred, sometimes meaning set apart, sometimes possibly meaning unmarried woman of ambiguous status. There are too many records to ignore, but too few that tell the full story. Were they revered, exploited, both, neither? She fingers the necklace again. I left when my voice started to crack, she says. Priests didn't want women who looked like mothers. They wanted girls who could be mistaken for angels. So I moved out here, still get men sometimes, fewer now, mostly traders with a taste for nostalgia. You watch the shadow of the ziggurat stretch across the plaza, slowly creeping across the stone tiles like a tide coming in. She watches it too. Funny, she says. We thought being close to the gods would make us special, sacred, but all it did was make us useful. She stands, stretching stiff joints. Still, it's a good spot, not too loud, good shade. You thank her and she smiles. Thank me by remembering, she says. Don't let them write us out when they write the stories. You promise you won't. And as she walks away, her faded robe fluttering behind her like the last line of a forgotten prayer, you sit quietly beneath the fig tree and think about what it means to live in the shadow of power, close enough to feel its heat, never close enough to be warmed by it. You head east, deeper into the city, where the ziggurat's shadow fades and the bright noise of the living takes over again. Babylon is thick with rhythms, shouting vendors, thudding wheels, bleating goats, and the constant slap of sandals against stone. It's all movement, all urgency, but tucked between the rush of daily life is something slower, more insidious. Paperwork. That's right. Babylon ran on clay, mountains of it, soft damp wedge-marked tablets that recorded everything from royal decrees to goat sales to fights between neighbours over who stole whose donkey. But you're not looking for livestock disputes today. You're here to learn about something harder to track, something that doesn't quite fit into the neatly labelled shelves of temple archives, the bureaucracy of the body. You're led by a young scribe, barefoot, wide-eyed, with fingers permanently stained from ink and clay dust. He works for a city registrar and has agreed, after some careful bribery, 1 fig, 2 compliments, and a comment about his flawless handwriting, to show you the back rooms of the archive. Most of it's boring, he warns. Debts, harvest counts, how many jars of fish sauce a tavern can conserve in a week. But he opens a thick wooden door, and suddenly you're in a room filled with shelves stacked high with flat square tablets, hundreds, maybe thousands, each one pressed with the lines of cuneiform so precise it almost looks like decoration. This is where Babylon tried to make order from chaos, where people's lives were filed away like accounts payable. He pulls one out. This one's from 5 years ago, he says. Complaint from a wife about the woman her husband was visiting, Harim too. She wanted the city elders to fine him for spending the household silver on someone not included in the marriage contract. You raise your eyebrows. He shrugs. Didn't work, but she tried. This is what no one tells you. Babylon tracked sex, not in the moral sense, but in the economic one. If a man paid a prostitute and there was a dispute, over time, service, price, it could be brought before a local judge. If a brothel had too many complaints, it might be fined or rarely shut down. If a woman worked in a temple and was found to be accepting gifts outside the expected rituals, she might be punished for mixing sacred duties with profit. And here's your historical truth. Some of these cases were recorded in detail, and some women even had names. Not many, but enough to know they existed. Women who demanded to be paid, who filed disputes, who hired scribes to document the silver owed them for services rendered. They weren't trying to make history, they were trying to make rent. The scribe shows you another tablet, smaller, older, cracked along one edge. It's a lease agreement between a woman and the owner of a single-room apartment near the harbour. The woman is described as a freelancer, which in Babylonian legal terms usually meant she wasn't tied to a temple or household. She was on her own. The lease included a clause that if she brought in guests after moonrise, she owed the landlord an extra half shekel per visit. The scribe smirks. Even the landlords wanted a cut. You believe it. You move to another part of the room, where several tablets are marked with the symbol for the House of Records, a stylized gate with lines like tally marks beneath it. These are the ones the officials cared about. Inside you find lists of names, not just men but women, some listed as debtors, some as property, some as petitioners. One entry catches your eye. Callistu, daughter of Ninsara, formerly temple servant, now registered as independent contractor in the Quarter of the Bronze Workers. Permitted to operate without temple oversight, monthly taxes to be paid in silver or grain. You blink. Babylon had independent sex workers registered like city vendors, like potters, like spice sellers. You ask the scribe how common that was. He shrugs. More than people think, especially the older ones. Once they left temple service or outgrew brothels, some tried to make it legal, safer. They even had seals made. He rummages through a side drawer and pulls out a small round object, a seal cylinder made of lapis lazuli, engraved with a lioness and a pair of stars. Used to be hers, he says. Callistu. She'd roll it across clay to make her mark on contracts. You roll the seal across your palm. It's smooth, cool, heavier than it looks. This is the other side of prostitution in Babylon, the one rarely discussed. Not the rituals, not the seduction, not the abuse, but the paperwork. The logistics of a woman making her body her business and learning to navigate a world built by men with tablets and stamps and ledger lines. They weren't always successful. Some went missing from the records, likely disappeared in debt or disgrace. But some, like Callistu, kept going and left behind a faint trail of wedge-shaped footprints. Now for your quirky fact, Babylon had entire scribal schools devoted to training young boys in cuneiform, and some of their practice tablets have been recovered. Among the usual, the King's Mighty, and I own 3 goats, there are fragments that say things like, the woman did not return the silver, or she said yes but then said no. Scholars believe some scribes practiced with mock legal cases, little morality plays carved into clay to help them learn the flow of accusation and defence. And here's your scholarly debate. Were these bureaucratic mentions of prostitutes signs of empowerment or exploitation? Some argue that being included in the system gave women a rare kind of agency. They could demand payment, sue for damages, rent property. Others argue that it was just another way to control them, to track their movements, tax their labour, and punish them for stepping outside assigned roles. Maybe both are true, maybe that's the point. As you leave the archives, the scribe hands you a copy of one of the simpler tablets, a replica pressed fresh. A good reminder, he says, even the gods need good records. You walk back into the sun, the little clay tablet warm in your palm, the lines still soft. Somewhere out there, Babylon's women are still making deals, still keeping ledgers in their heads, still trying to get paid before the moon rises too high. And behind it all, the city watches, not with judgment, but with ink and stylus, waiting to press every breath into permanence. Babylon doesn't do subtlety well. The city is all brightness and clamour, gods with bull legs and human heads, ziggurats scraping the sky, temples blazing with gold and incense. But every once in a while you find something quiet, subtle, slippery. Tonight it comes in the form of a veil. You're in the dye market now, where smells of hot ash and vinegar sting your nose and piles of wool drip colour into the dusty gutters. Reds like dried blood, yellows sharp as sunlight, deep blues that ripple like the Euphrates under moonlight. But you're not here for textiles. You're watching the women, and more importantly, what they wear. Because if sex work in Babylon was an ecosystem, then disguise was its camouflage. Welcome to the world of the disguises they wore. Veils, wigs, names borrowed for a night, the soft science of being both seen and unseen at the same time. You first notice it when you see Luma again. She's walking near the vendors, but she doesn't look like herself. Her hair, normally tied high in braids, is hidden beneath a linen veil. Her robes are pale and unadorned. No jewellery, no perfume. For a moment you wonder if you've got the wrong person. But then she glances sideways at a man who doesn't see her. And you understand, she's cloaked. Not for the gods, not for modesty, but for protection. You trail her from a distance until she ducks into an alley near the bread ovens. When she notices you, she pulls the veil down slightly and sighs. "Too many eyes today," she mutters, "and not the paying kind." You ask how often she does this. "Whenever I need to walk like a ghost," she says, "not invisible, just unreadable." Here's your historical fact. In Babylon, veils were both powerful and problematic. They signalled status. Married women, high-ranking women, temple women all wore them in public. But harem too. They were explicitly banned from veiling in certain laws. The idea was simple. Veils were for respectable women. Prostitutes weren't allowed to borrow that mask. Of course, the reality was murkier. Many sex workers veiled anyway, especially when they weren't working. It was a matter of safety, anonymity, and sometimes strategy. If you wore the right kind of veil, no one questioned you. If you walked like a priestess or a merchant's wife, you passed through streets without a second glance. It wasn't just about hiding your face. It was about crafting a new identity from a bolt of linen and a borrowed gait. Luma pulls the veil higher as two guards walk past. They don't notice her, or if they do, they say nothing. You ask if she's ever been caught. "Once, she says, "a priest saw me veiled near the temple gate, reported me. I had to pay 2 shekels and pretend I was someone's runaway sister." She grins at the memory. Made the story so convincing. He asked if I wanted a job in the kitchens. And here's your quirky fact, wigs were also part of the toolkit. Babylon had a healthy trade in human and animal hair. Women of all classes wore them, sometimes for fashion, sometimes for deception. Some brothels kept a shelf of wigs, long dark braids for the Sumerian look, tight curls for the northern style, even blonde pieces from trade routes farther west. A different wig, a different voice. And suddenly you were a widow from Sippar or a priestess on leave. It was theatre. Babylon was good at theatre. But the disguises weren't just physical. Names too were borrowed, dropped, reinvented. A woman might use one name with clients, another at the dye market, a third with the local healer. True names were currency, valuable and dangerous. Some never used theirs at all. Luma, for example. Not her real name. You've known that from the start. Now for your scholarly debate. Were these disguises acts of resistance or just survival tactics? Some scholars argue that veiling, aliasing and persona shifting gave Babylonian sex workers agency, a way to reclaim their privacy and shape their own narratives. Others say it was a necessity forced by a system that refused to protect them. That veiling was dangerous precisely because it gave them too much power. The truth, as always, is complicated, like everything else in this city. Luma leads you to a roof overlooking the river. It's late now. The stars are out, scattered and small. She pulls off the veil completely and shakes her hair loose. It falls around her shoulders like a curtain. "You ever see a man recognize you and pretend he didn't?" she asks. You nod. "Even if you haven't. You understand," she sighs. "It's funny. When I'm veiled, I'm too respectable to touch. When I'm not, I'm too available to leave alone. No right way to be seen." She pauses, then adds, "That's why I like the river. It doesn't care who I am." You both watch it shimmer in the dark, gold and black and soft. Now for your fringe fact. Some Babylonian brothels trained women in roleplay. Not just for seduction, but for safety. If a client wanted a priestess, they could become one. If he wanted a foreign merchant's daughter, done. These personas weren't just fantasy, they were shields, tools, masks that let women keep something of themselves untouched, even while their bodies were for sale. Luma turns to you and smiles. Not the performative kind, but the small, tired kind that only comes after the wig is off, the veil is folded, the name dropped. "Tomorrow," she says, "I'll be someone else. New hair, new scent, new story." You ask if it ever gets exhausting. "All the time," she says, "but the moment I stop, I become too easy to find." You leave her there on the roof, her silhouette framed by starlight, already planning her next version. Babylon may love its laws, its rituals, its stone tablets of record, but even it can't capture the shape-shifting lives of women like her, because sometimes the only way to survive a city built on appearances is to disappear. Just enough. The sun comes up angry the next morning, a molten disk rising over the rooftops, like it has something to prove. The city stirs beneath it. Roosters crowing with too much confidence, vendors dragging carts through still sleeping streets, and the groan of shutters being forced open against the heat. You walk through it all, slower than usual, your thoughts sticky with everything you've seen and heard. The rituals, the secrets, the disguises. And now, something harder to pin down. Something that lives in the spaces between people. Scorn, respect, and that weird law. You're heading toward a quieter district now, one where the streets are a little wider and the courtyards are cleaner. Not rich exactly, but comfortable. You pass a garden full of lilies and reeds, tended by a servant girl with strong arms and a faster mouth. She eyes you warily, then cracks a smile. You looking for someone's wife or someone's problem? You grin back, just passing through. She laughs and says, then you better keep moving before the neighbours start inventing a reason for you to be here. And that's the problem, isn't it? Reputation. Babylon was a city of records, but it was also a city of whispers. A woman could survive years of sex work without a scratch, but one poorly timed glance, one jealous wife, one grumbling priest, and suddenly she was a pariah, or worse, an example. You turn down an alley and find yourself face to face with a wall. Not a metaphorical one, a literal one, covered in graffiti. Some of it's beautiful, painted figures of Ishtar with golden hair and star-strewn robes. Some of it's just words scratched into plaster with whatever tool was nearby. A few are love notes. Others are threats. And then there's a line written so deeply it's practically carved. She wore the veil and was not a wife. She is cursed. There it is, the weird law. You've heard about it before, maybe in the archives, maybe in a tavern where a madam laughed it off. But seeing it here, etched into the wall, makes it real. Let's break it down. In Babylonian legal code, there was an actual law, possibly part of a broader edict, stating that if a woman who was not married or temple-bound dared to wear a veil in public, she could be punished by having her clothing confiscated and being whipped near the city gates. Yes, that's real. Yes, there are scholars still debating what it actually meant. But the core idea was simple. Veils weren't just cloth, they were social armour. And Babylon did not want the wrong women borrowing it. You sit near the wall, reading other lines. Beltane stole my husband and now begs for figs. Kanitu dances like a goddess. Her price is fair. A man who seeks me will find his silver well spent. And then, oddly as enough, the gods do not care how many men a woman has pleased, only how many she has betrayed. Now for your historical truth, prostitutes in Hard Babylon occupied a strange place in the social hierarchy. They weren't fully shunned, but they weren't respected either. They could attend festivals but not lead processions. They could pay taxes but not vote in civic decisions. They could be legally protected if their patron or madam had power. But without that shield, they were vulnerable to scorn, violence, and moral judgment wrapped in religious authority. And here's where things get messier. Some prostitutes were actually revered, particularly the Kadishtu or Ishtaritu, women associated with temple rituals or festivals. They weren't mocked. They were mystical, dangerous, sacred. Men paid them not just for their bodies, but for blessings, for luck, for dreams interpreted in the language of stars and thighs. So what gave? Why the flip between reverence and ridicule? You head into a nearby courtyard where a group of women are spinning thread and talking louder than their work would seem to warrant. One of them waves you over with a look that says she knows exactly who you are, even if she doesn't know your name. Sit, she says. You're the one asking about us, yes? You nod. Another woman snorts. Then you should know the worst part of this life isn't the nights, it's the mornings. When the men walk past you like they've never seen your face, when their wives whisper behind their veils. The first woman shrugs. Or when the priest who paid you last week tells the crowd you've corrupted the city's morals. That gets a laugh. And here's your quirky fact of the night. There's a recorded case, just one, of a priest being publicly shamed for sleeping with a harimtu, and then trying to accuse her of sorcery when she refused to see him again. The court records, on a chipped tablet, note that he was fined for unjust complaint, and forced to offer grain to the temple in penance. The woman? She moved to a different district. That was the victory. Back in the courtyard, someone's pouring beer into a chip cup and passing it around. A third woman, older, more tired than the rest, says softly, "It's not all bad. Some men are kind, some even come back. But the worst are the ones who pretend they're better than you, who say things like, 'You're not like the others.'" She spits into the dust. "We're all like the others. And here's your scholarly debate. Were Babylonian prostitutes part of a social underclass? Or something entirely different, a parallel class with its own rules, norms, and practices? Some researchers believe these women formed their own communities, operated like guilds, shared clients and secrets, even buried each other. Others think that idea is romantic, too clean, that the reality was more isolated, more brutal, less sisterhood, more survival. You stay until the sun starts to tilt westward. The conversation turns to gossip. Who owes silver? Who ran off with a merchant? Who was seen sneaking out of a priest's quarters at dawn? It's equal parts judgment and envy. You leave the courtyard and pass the wall again. The graffiti is still there. Of course it is. Babylon writes its judgments in public and its kindnesses in whispers. As you walk away, you hear someone behind you say, "At least the gods don't care." Oh, you hope that's true, because in this city of sacred rituals and stamped clay contracts, sometimes the most radical act a woman can do is simply exist, unashamed, unveiled, and utterly unforgettable. The moon is already low in the sky when you find yourself wandering back toward the tavern quarter. The city never really sleeps, at least not all at once, but something about these streets feels different at this hour. Softer maybe, less performative. The vendors are quiet now, their stalls draped in cloth. The children have gone home. Even the drunkards have fallen into that particular state of groaning silence that comes just before regret sets in. And you're here, walking into a space that's rarely recorded in clay or carved into stone. You're about to eavesdrop on a story most men never admit to, the lonely client problem. You push open the wooden door of a small tavern with flaking paint and a crooked lintel. The scent inside is heavy. Billed beer, charcoal, perfume, and something sour beneath it all. It's not clean, but it's familiar, and it's warm. A few patrons sit scattered across low stools, murmuring in half-hearted conversation. You spot Luma in the corner, sitting across from a man who looks like he's carrying an entire ziggurat on his back. He's older, maybe 50, dressed in a plain wool robe. No rings, no seals, not poor, but not rich. Somewhere in between, like most men in Babylon. You sit near the fire pit, close enough to hear but not enough to intrude. Not yet. He's telling her about his son. Something about the boy growing up too fast. "Doesn't speak to me anymore," he says. "Thinks I'm old, useless. I built the floor of our house with my hands, you know. That's not nothing." Luma nods slowly, swirling her drink. "It's not nothing," she echoes. He keeps going. His wife is ill. His oldest daughter just married and moved across the river. His back hurts. The taxes are worse this year. He's tired. So tired. And here's the thing, he hasn't touched her. He hasn't even tried. He's not here for sex. He's here because he's lonely. This wasn't uncommon. Not in ancient Babylon, and not now. The Harimtu were more than bodies for sale. They were confessors, counselors, even therapists before the word existed. For many men, especially the ones sandwiched between the wealthy and the forgotten, paying for comfort wasn't always about touch. It was about being seen. You catch Luma's eye briefly. She gives you the faintest raise of an eyebrow, a warning not to ruin this. She listens to him for almost an hour, just sipping and nodding, offering little comments when he falters. When he finally stops talking, she asks, "Do you want to go upstairs?" He shakes his head. No, I just wanted this." He drops a few silver pieces on the table, enough to pay for more than this. Then he stands, adjusts his robe, and walks out. He never looks back. Luma watches the door for a moment, then slouches in her seat. "That," she says, "was the fourth one this week." You ask how common it is. "More than you'd think," she replies. "Men come in thinking they want one thing, end up needing something else." She stretches her arms and leans back. There's a lot of sadness in this city. It has nowhere to go. Now for your historical truth. Babylonian records mostly treat prostitution as a financial exchange. Tablets note payments, disputes, contracts. But there are occasional glimpses of something more nuanced. Letters between clients and women that speak of longing, of affection, even grief. One fragment from a personal tablet reads, "Though I paid you with silver, I left with a heart heavier than when I came." That's not a ledger. That's a confession. You ask Luma if these men ever come back. Some do, she says. Same seat, same drink, same stories. They think I don't remember. But I do, and here's your quirky fact. Babylonian taverns were often more intimate than the brothels. They served as semi-private meeting spots, especially for the working class. Some tavern women doubled as prostitutes, while others were simply paid to sit, smile, and listen. In one old tablet, a tavern keeper complains that her listening girls cost more than the ale. She still paid them. Business was better when they were around. You shift on the bench as another man enters, younger. Nervous. You recognise the pattern now. He glances around, spots a woman near the hearth, hesitates. He doesn't want sex, not yet. He wants attention, reassurance. The kind you can't ask your wife for. The kind your mother stopped giving you years ago. The kind you don't realise you've missed until you pay for it, and leave wondering why your chest feels so heavy. Luma stands. That's mine, she says, nodding toward the newcomer. You let her go. And here's your scholarly debate. Were Babylonian prostitutes ever emotionally involved with their clients? Some argue that it was all performance, that any warmth was strategic, learned, and transactional. Others suggest that repeated encounters led to real bonds, complicated, unequal, but genuine in their own way. The evidence is thin, but those rare letters, those scribbled poems, those secret tablets hidden in drawers, those suggest something human beneath all the performance. You walk outside into the cooler night. The moon is brighter now, casting silvery light on the city's edges. You pass a man sitting alone on a bench, head in hands. He doesn't need a harem to. He just needs someone to ask if he's okay. But no one does. That's the thing about Babylon. It's full of people, thousands of them, and yet loneliness grows like ivy between the bricks. And some women, like Luma, learned how to live off it, how to offer comfort for a price. How to hold another person's sorrow for an hour and then let it go. It's not sacred, it's not sinful, it's just human. It's the middle of the night and Babylon is sweating in its sleep. The heat never really leaves here. It just slides into the corners, hangs in doorways, sticks behind your knees. The alleyways are quiet now, except for the buzz of insects and the occasional splash of water from a rooftop jar. You're heading to the healer's quarter again, not to see Damkina this time, but to meet someone she mentioned in passing. A man with a box of sharp tools and no bedside manner, and a woman beside you who knows which herbs to boil and which lies to tell. Because tonight's story isn't gentle. It's about diseases, remedies and denial. The things everyone knew, no one said out loud, and most people only whispered about once it was already too late. The clinic is barely marked, just a set of red ochre handprints above the door. You push aside the curtain and step inside. The air hits you immediately. Bitter. Acrid. Sweat, herbs, and the unmistakable sour smell of infection. A man on a mat groans quietly. Another sits upright, wrapped in linen, eyes staring forward like he's not really in his body anymore. At the far end of the room, a thin, bald man crouches beside a patient, peeling a fig with practiced disinterest. He doesn't look up when you approach. Visitor? He grunts. You nod. Just observing. Great, he mutters, tossing the fig peel aside. You want to wash your hands in pissy water, or should I fetch the real stuff? The woman beside him smiles thinly. Her name is Ninsutu. Unlike him, she does acknowledge your presence, and even offers you a small ceramic cup of something warm and sour smelling. Helps with nausea, she says. Not that it'll help with what you're about to see. She gestures toward the mat. A young man lies curled up, back arched in pain. His lips are cracked, his groin wrapped in linen darkened with pus. You flinch. Ninsutu doesn't. 5 nights ago, she says. Visited a woman from the harbour quarter. Came here 2 days later, couldn't urinate. Now he can't stand. We've done everything. Oil of cassia, juniper tincture, even cooled him with river stones. Nothing sticks. You ask what it is. Rot, she says. The kind that hides until it burns. And there it is. Ancient Babylon, for all its rituals and records, had a sexually transmitted infection problem. Of course it did. The city was packed. People were constantly moving, touching, trading, sneaking into each other's beds. And sex work, legal, ritualized, regulated, meant there were always points of contact, literally. Here's your hard historical truth. We don't have clay tablets that say this man had gonorrhea, but we do have texts that describe symptoms suspiciously similar. Burning during urination, genital sores, fevers, and what some translations call the dripping disease. Treatments are listed in medical cuneiform documents like the Diagnostic Handbook, many of them compiled by scholars in the city of Ur but copied and shared across Babylon. They include ointments, prayers, and sometimes instructions to bathe in river water during a full moon. Sometimes the treatment worked, often it didn't. The bald man, Aban, grumbles as he mixes something in a bowl. They never tell us the truth, he mutters. Say they drank bad water, say it's a rash, say it's curses. Meanwhile the city's pissing. You ask if they try to trace infections, find the source, stop the spread. Ninsutu snorts. You think the temple wants people saying Ishtar's girls are making men sick? Or that the taverns are full of rot? No, they'd rather say it's bad luck, maybe too much beer. Anything but what it really is. And here's your fringe fact. Some temple priests blame diseases like this on divine punishment, not for sleeping with a prostitute, but for failing to complete the proper rituals afterward. There were even tablets that instructed men to offer grain and honey to the goddess if they felt burning in the loins. One unlucky man wrote to a healer begging for a cure after dishonouring the sacred veil. The clay cuts off mid-sentence. You move to another corner of the room. There, a young woman sits quietly, face turned toward the wall. She has no visible injuries, but her hands shake. Ninsutu kneels beside her. She came in yesterday, she says softly. Says her breath feels short. Says her skin hurts. You ask what the real story is. Her client didn't pull out his knife. He used his fists, thought she was someone else. When he realised, he ran. You ask if anyone reported it. She stares at you. No one wants to admit they were with a harem too when things go wrong. It's easier to let her disappear. You look around the room again, half full of broken people and the other half full of people pretending they're not. You ask if things are getting worse. Ninsutu hesitates, then nods. More people, more pressure, less care. We see more sick men, more women with fevers that don't break, more babies born too early or not at all. You ask if there are remedies that work. She gives a tight smile. Yes, but not enough, and not for free. And here's your scholarly debate. How advanced were Babylonian understandings of disease transmission? Some argue they were close to identifying bacterial causes, based on detailed descriptions of symptom progression and infection sites. Others say their remedies, while impressive, were entirely based on magical thinking, chance, planetary alignments, and guesswork. But standing here in this smoky, bitter-smelling room, you realise the truth doesn't matter much when someone's burning from the inside out. Before you leave, Aban calls out, "Don't forget to write about how no one listens until it's too late. That's the real disease." You nod. As you step outside, the air hits you like hot cloth. You hear someone coughing behind the curtain, a long, ragged sound that seems to come from the soul. And somewhere across the city, another man steps into a brothel. Another woman fakes a smile. Another priest closes his eyes and says, "It's not my problem. Babylon is full of gods, but the body keeps its own ledgers, and no one likes the numbers it's been adding up lately." By morning, the healer's quarter is a memory trailing bitterly behind you, something acrid at the back of your throat, impossible to cough out. You try to shake it off by heading south, where the city grows more uneven, the roads narrower, the buildings messier. Like the rules themselves are starting to fray at the edges. Babylon, for all its might and majesty, is still a city of people, tired, flawed, and perpetually in trouble. And in the underlayers of that trouble lies one of the strangest and least talked about aspects of sex work in this ancient world, the afterlife of a prostitute. You follow the twisting alleys until you reach a low hill just outside the city's walls. It's not much, just a rise in the land where the soil is soft enough to dig. But it's crowded. This is one of Babylon's burial grounds, and though it's not where kings and high priests go to rest, it's still a place of ceremony. A place where the city's forgotten get remembered, if only for a moment. There's a funeral happening when you arrive. Small, quiet, mostly women. They're gathered around a freshly dug pit, a clay jar of incense burning at the head. You linger at the edge, watching. The body wrapped in linen isn't stiff. She hasn't been dead long. Someone cared enough to wash her. Her face is visible, weathered but not old, maybe 30. There's a small blue bead tied into her hair. Someone cared enough to give her that too. You catch a whisper, "She worked near the fish gate," and the unspoken "oh" that follows it. Everyone knows what that means. She was a prostitute. The women finish their prayers, low murmurs offered to Ishtar, to Ereshkigal, to anyone who might listen. Then slowly they lower the body into the ground. No chanting priests, no offerings stacked high, just the earth and the sky and the silence of a city that isn't built to mourn women like her. You move closer to one of the women as the group begins to disperse. She's older, her face lined like clay left out too long in the sun. Was she family? You ask gently. She was like family, the woman replies after a pause. Shared bread, shared jokes, shared clients sometimes. You ask if the burial was official. She snorts. No priest would come, said he was too busy, said she didn't die clean. And there it is. Here's your historical truth. The burial of prostitutes in ancient Babylon was deeply tied to status, and status, as always, was a slippery thing. If a woman worked in a temple and died in service, she might receive rights, maybe even be buried in temple land. But if she was independent, or accused of impurity, or died without a man to speak for her, things got complicated fast. There were tablets listing burial rights, who qualified for what kind of tomb, who could be buried with family, who couldn't. Harimtu were often excluded, unless someone paid to make it otherwise. Some women pooled their silver just for that. Not for food, not for shelter, for death. The woman beside you looks out across the graves. We do what we can, she says. Wrap the body, say the words, burn the incense. Sometimes we leave bread or honey, but it's never enough. You ask why it matters. She turns to you, because if no one does it, she walks. You blink. Walks? Her face is dead serious now. The restless dead. You don't bury a woman right, she comes back, stays in the wind, or whispers in your ear at night, makes your skin go cold. That's why we light the fire. That's why we tie the bead in her hair, to keep her from following us home. Here's your fringe fact. Babylonian ghost law was no joke, especially when it came to women who died violently, unexpectedly, or without proper rites. The Etimu, a type of spirit, was believed to haunt the living, particularly those who had ignored their duties, and prostitutes, often dying alone and unloved, were prime candidates. People left offerings of salt and beer on their doorsteps just in case. You look back at the grave. The women are gone now. Just the smoke remains. You ask the wind a quiet question. Where do the women of Babylon go when their names aren't recorded? There's no answer, just dust. You head back toward the city. Along the way, you pass another grave, older, unmarked, except for a small carved figurine lying on top. A lioness, Ishtar's animal. Someone remembered, at least for a while. And here's your scholarly debate. Were Harimtu excluded from traditional burial because of ritual impurity, or because of socio-economic neglect? Some believe it was religious, an obsession with purity that kept them out of official tombs. Others think it was simply logistics. If no family came forward, if no temple claimed them, they went into the earth quickly and quietly. Either way, their absence in the archaeological record is telling. You pause as you re-enter the city. The gates loom high, guards barely glancing at you. Somewhere above, doves flutter near the rooflines. The air smells like heat and hearthfire and the strange ache of memory. And you realise this. Babylon remembers its kings in marble. It remembers its battles in stone. But it remembers its women in whispers, soft ones, fading fast. Unless someone listens. Unless someone writes it down. Unless someone stands at the edge of a nameless grave and says, she lived, she mattered, she burned like the rest of us. You walk for a long time after the burial, not because you have anywhere to be, but because you don't. The streets are slowly refilling, stretching and yawning, like a beast waking from sleep. Market stalls creak open. The smell of flatbread wafts out of ovens, and the endless pulse of Babylon kicks in again. It's as if the night never happened, as if no one died. But you carry it. That grave, that bead, that cements. You find yourself drifting toward the city's outer ring, a space that doesn't appear on official maps, that priests don't name in their chants. It's not quite slums, not quite markets, it's transitional. A place for things and people that don't fit in anywhere else. There are stables here, piles of chipped pottery, a halfway built well, and a structure that looks more like a pile of brick thrown together in defiance than a real building. This is where women like Luma go when they're no longer Luma. This is where they go to disappear. You don't knock on the door, you don't have to. A thin woman with silver-streaked hair opens it before your hand touches the wood. She doesn't smile, but she lets you in. Inside it's dim and quiet, the walls lined with crates and rugs and folded linen. A cat sleeps on the edge of a cracked table. You see 3 other women, older, alert, watching you without blinking. One of them gestures for you to sit. "You're the one asking about us," she says, not unkindly. You nod. She pours tea that smells like fennel and mint. You sip. It burns, but pleasantly. "What do you want to know now?" she asks. You look around. What happens after? That gets a slow smile from another. "You mean when the perfume runs out and the men stop coming?" You nod. They exchange glances. Not annoyed, just tired. Like they've had this conversation before, many times in many forms. The first woman leans forward. "If you're lucky, you save enough silver to leave. Maybe you marry a merchant who doesn't ask too many questions. Maybe you move to Sipar and pretend to be a widow. Maybe you join a temple as a cook or linen washer. And if you're not lucky, you ask, then you come here. Here's your historical truth. Babylonian records, as exhaustive as they often are, get frustratingly sadder when it comes to aging prostitutes. The Harimtu and Kadishtu vanish from the tablets after a certain point, no longer listed in payments, lawsuits, temple rosters. So where did they go? Some historians think they were absorbed into other roles. Domestic servants, nursemaids, wet nurses, brewers. Others believe they simply slipped into obscurity. This place. You're standing in obscurity. The woman with had the mint tea, her name is Iltu, says she once worked near the jewellery quarter. Good clients, she says, soft hands. They always smelled like wine and myrrh. Another nods and says she worked festivals for 7 years before her knees started to give out. The third, who hasn't spoken until now, says simply, "I don't remember who I was before this." They're not looking for pity. In fact, they seem oddly at peace. You ask if they're safe here. "Safe enough," says Iltu. "The temple guards don't bother us. The thieves know we don't keep anything worth stealing, and we help the young ones when they're in trouble. That buys us goodwill." You hear a baby cry from the next room. One of the women stands and disappears behind a curtain. When she returns, she's rocking a small bundle. "Not mine," she says quickly. "Her mother left 3 days ago, never came back." You want to ask what happens now, but you already know. Now for your quirky fact, there are records from nearby cities like Mary and Nipper that mention older women listed simply as dam kur, literally foreign woman, living in shared households. Some scholars believe these were informal shelters, places where women without husbands, contracts or status lived communally. Not temples, not brothels, just survival spaces, like this one. Iltu sets down her cup and pulls out a small wooden box. Inside are scraps of cloth, bone combs, bits of charcoal, and a seal, a real one, carved with a lion and a palm tree. "This used to be my name," she says, rolling it across the table. "Don't need it now. No one asks who I am anymore." She says it without sorrow. You ask what keeps them going. Another long silence. Then, each other. And here's your scholarly debate. Were these informal retirement homes organised by the women themselves or tolerated by the city as a quiet solution to a public problem? Some researchers say they were extensions of temple charity, protected by the same goddess who oversaw fertility and love. Others argue that Babylon simply looked the other way. These women weren't a threat, they weren't a spectacle, they were just there. The cat stretches, someone laughs, the tea is poured again, and then the mood shifts. A younger woman steps in through the door. Her robe is torn, her lip is split. No one asks what happened. No one needs to. They make space for her without a word. You realise this is not a house. It's a net. A soft one. A fraying one, but a net all the same. You finish your tea, thank them. One of them, the quiet one, presses a smooth stone into your hand. "For memory," she says. You step back into the light. The sun is climbing again, the city is already loud, but back there in that brick pile shelter are women who no longer need to perform, to veil, to beg, to run. They just exist. Tired, worn, alive. Not everyone gets that far in Babylon. And those who do, they've earned the silence. You wake to thunder, not the kind from the sky, but the kind made by drums, dozens of them, beating like the heartbeat of something ancient and unstoppable. The city is alive today in a way it hasn't been for weeks. Flags flutter from rooftops. Musicians march down the main boulevard. The streets are flooded with people, jostling and shouting, all of them dressed brighter, laughing louder, walking faster. It takes a moment for you to remember. It's festival day, one of the high holy days in honour of Ishtar, goddess of love, war, sex and transformation. And tonight, she will own Babylon. You're pulled along with the crowd until the press of bodies becomes too tight to resist. Incense floods your nose, sticky sweet and choking. Someone hands you a strip of coloured cloth, already stained with oil and perfume. You don't know what it means yet, but everyone else seems to be wearing one. So you tie it around your wrist. You've seen festivals before, watched from rooftops, caught glimpses from alleys, but this is the first time you're in the middle of it. And that means you're about to witness something strange and ancient. The public reclaiming of power by Babylon's sex workers. The procession starts slowly. First come the priests, dressed in embroidered robes the colour of lapis, their hair oiled and faces painted. They chant hymns in a rhythm so practiced it sounds like breathing. Then come the temple acolytes, carrying statues, small, beautiful, terrifying, each one a version of Ishtar. Winged, armed, naked, veiled. Every form, every mood. And then, just behind them, come the ones no one ever talks about in the records, but who steal the show every year. The women, not the noble women, not the temple wives, the harimtu, the kadishtu, the women from the taverns and back rooms and alleyways. And they are dazzling. You don't recognise Luma at first. Her hair is wrapped in gold thread, piled high in coils that gleam like sunlight. Her robe is nearly translucent, dyed a violent red that clashes with every rule of modesty. She walks barefoot, holding a tambourine in one hand and a garland of myrtle in the other. Her face is painted, not just to look beautiful, but to declare something. She sees you and smirks. Didn't think I'd miss this, did you? You try to respond, but she's already spinning into the crowd. The other women follow, dozens of them, each more vividly dressed than the last. Some wear veils, but they're not meant to conceal. They're sheer, sparkling, seductive. Others wear nothing at all from the waist up, their skin painted with swirls and stars. Men cheer, but not in that leering way you've heard in taverns. Today the applause is reverent, a little nervous, like they're watching something holy and dangerous all at once. Because today, these women aren't sinners, they're Ishtar incarnate. Here's your historical truth. Babylonian festivals, especially those in honour of Ishtar, included public rituals that blurred the line between performance and worship. Some scholars believe that temple prostitutes led these parades, reenacting mythological moments, embodying the goddess's power. Others argue that it wasn't official at all, just tolerated chaos. But everyone agrees that on these days, for these hours, the harimtu were untouchable. The crowd parts to make room for a small platform dragged by oxen covered in reeds and flowers. On it, a woman stands completely still. Her body is painted in white ash, her eyes rimmed with black. She raises her arms and begins to chant. The drums quiet. Even the birds seem to pause. Her voice is low and guttural, not pretty but raw, like it's rising from the belly of the earth. She sings the goddess's lament, someone whispers beside you. The night Ishtar descended into the underworld. And here's your fringe fact. In the myth, Ishtar travels to the underworld to demand power from her sister, Ereshkigal. But with each gate she passes, she's forced to remove something. Her crown, her earrings, her robe, until she arrives naked, vulnerable, and enraged. She dies, is trapped, until another god bargains her release. She returns, changed, furious, unstoppable. It's not hard to see why these women love her. Luma dances in front of the platform now, hips rolling, eyes closed, body moving like she's shedding something with every step. You've seen her tired, you've seen her veiled. But this is something else. She looks like she might burst into flames and take the whole city with her. You lean in close to a man beside you and ask, "Is this allowed?" He shrugs. For today, nothing's forbidden. And here's your scholarly debate. Were these festivals genuine expressions of empowerment for Babylon's prostitutes, or carefully controlled spectacles that let them play goddess for a day before returning to the shadows? Some say the performances allowed them to reclaim their bodies and visibility. Others argue it was just another manipulation, an illusion of elevation that didn't change their status once the incense burned out. You watch as the crowd begins to chant with the dancers, the city pulsing like a single body. Coins are tossed, offerings made, someone spills beer over your feet. You don't care. The energy is too strange, too heavy, too exhilarating. And then, almost as suddenly as it began, the music slows. The dancers stop. Luma kneels at the edge of the platform, arms raised. The painted woman stops singing. A priest steps forward with a torch and lights a bundle of reeds. Smoke spirals into the air. The crowd goes quiet. For one breathless moment, everyone is watching the same flame, remembering. Then the crowd exhales, and the spell breaks. The platform is wheeled away. The dancers vanish down alleys. The drums fade. People begin to laugh again, buy food, chase children, argue about how much silver was thrown into the offering jars. It's over. You wander the square looking for Luma. She's changed clothes, now wrapped in a plain robe, her hair loose and damp with sweat. Her eyes are bloodshot. Her hands are shaking. "Big day," she says, trying to laugh. "It's like flying and drowning at the same time." You ask if she feels different afterward. "Just for a little while," she says. "Then the city remembers who I am." But then she pauses, looks up at the empty platform being wheeled away, and adds, "Still, I remember too." And that might be enough, because in this city of stone rules and clay punishments, sometimes one day of glory is a revolution. Even if no one writes it down, you leave the festival behind like a dream you can't quite wake from, bright colours still seared into your vision, that chanting still humming in your ears. But the streets are changing again, slipping back into their usual rhythms. Vendors return to haggling, priests return to muttering, and Babylon exhales the glitter from its lungs like it's ashamed of having shown too much of itself. The goddess returns to her temple. The harem too return to the margins. But not everyone. Some women linger near the centre square and you follow them. Not out of curiosity anymore, but something heavier. They lead you toward a building you hadn't noticed before. It's not marked by a god's emblem or guarded like the temple gates. Just a low archway, open, welcoming. And above it, carved simply into wood, House of Listening. Inside, it's cool and quiet. Clay benches curve along the walls. Oil lamps burn softly, casting long shadows across jars, scrolls, and woven mats. A woman in her 50s sits at a table, grinding something into paste with slow, practiced movements. She looks up as you enter, eyes sharp, face calm. "I'm Ishaya," she says. "You're late." You blink. "Was I expected?" She shrugs. "People like you always come eventually. Curiosity has a smell." You sit, not quite sure what to expect. Ishaya hands you a cup of barley drink. Warm, bitter, thick as jamdutins. Around you other women sit in quiet conversation. Some laugh gently. Others just rest. "This is where they come," Ishaya explains. "When the temples say no, when the brothels don't pay enough, when the gods don't answer." You ask if it's a shelter. She tilts her head. "It's a place with no name, just ears." Here's your historical truth. While no official House of Listening appears in surviving Babylonian records, there is mention of quiet rooms or women's chambers in temple complexes, places not tied to ritual but to respite. Some scholars believe these were informal spaces run by elder women, former midwives, scribes or priestesses, who served as counselors, matchmakers or simply listeners. This house, whatever it is, fits that shape. A young woman sits across from you now, maybe 16. Her coal is smudged, her fingers trembling as she wraps and unwraps a piece of cloth in her lap. She doesn't speak, but Ishaya doesn't push. "She came after the festival," she murmurs. First time she's ever been touched like that. The man kissed her fingers before he left. She doesn't know if she's sad or grateful. And here's your fringe fact. Babylon had a word for the emotional aftermath of sex, nishu. It appears in love poems and prayer tablets. It means the residue of intimacy. Some believe that lingering nishu could make a person vulnerable to spirits or confuse the soul. Others called it the goddess's mark, proof that love, or something like it, had passed through the body. Ishaya stirs the paste again, this time adding crushed mint and ash. "We make ointments here," she says, "not just for burns, for bruises no one talks about, for rashes no one wants to explain, for the parts of a woman that aren't supposed to break." You ask how many women come here. "Too many for the room, not enough for the world," she replies. "Some just want a place to sit where no one stares at their knees. Others want to sleep without locking the door." A laugh floats from the other side of the room. A woman with deep lines around her mouth is telling a story involving a high priest, a goat, and a broken sandal. The others lean in, howling with delight. You'd think this was a celebration, not a confessional. Laughter's allowed, you ask? Ishaya smiles. It's required. And here's your scholarly debate. Did women in ancient Babylon form informal support systems, emotional, financial, spiritual, that operated outside of temple and family control? Some scholars say no, that the power dynamics were too rigid, the society too stratified. Others argue yes, pointing to references in letters and contracts where women loaned silver to each other, shared homes, and arranged quiet burials. It's hard to prove, but when you're sitting in a room like this, it feels hard to deny. One of the women beckons you to the back room. It's smaller, darker, filled with bowls, jars, and a low altar. Not to any god you recognize, just a smooth stone wrapped in faded linen, surrounded by dried flowers. She's the one we talk to when we don't know what else to do, the woman says. You ask who she is? No one, she replies, and that's why she listens. You kneel by the stone, say nothing, just breathe. When you rise, the woman presses a bundle of cloth into your hands. For Luma, she says. Tell her she's not the only one with questions. You step back into the main room. Ishaya is humming now, mixing herbs and grinding roots. The girl with the trembling hands is asleep on a mat, her cloth finally still. A breeze slips through the doorway. The room smells like myrrh and sweat and something gentler beneath it, something like hope. You leave quietly. Outside, the street is loud again, but you carry the silence with you, like a secret pressed into your palm. Because maybe Babylon is built on clay and conquest and gods, but under all that, in rooms like this, in voices that refuse to break, in hands that know how to mend, there's something stronger, and it listens. You don't go straight to Luma, not yet. The bundle of cloth in your hands is still warm somehow, like it remembers who tied it. You carry it with care, as if it might speak or bleed if you hold it wrong. Babylon sprawls ahead of you, as loud and merciless as ever. But something has shifted, not in the city, in you. You used to walk these streets as a guest, an observer, half invisible and half detached. Now, everything feels personal. Every clay brick, every veil, every alley, where laughter hides just beneath the threat of ruin. You wind your way toward the river, where Luma said she liked to sit when the noise became too much. You find her there, legs dangling over the bank, dress hiked just enough to feel the mud between her toes. Her hair is wet, not styled, not perfumed, just wet, like she dunked her head in the water and forgot to care. She hears you approach and glances up, eyes puffy but not crying. You look like someone who has something to say, she says, voice low. You sit beside her. Offer the bundle without a word. She unwraps it slowly. Inside, a handful of herbs, a small carved figure of a woman kneeling, and a piece of dyed linen, deep purple with black thread woven through it in the shape of two hands, one open, one closed. Luma blinks, almost smiles. So, you found them. You nod. They said you weren't alone. She runs a finger over the embroidered hands. No one ever says that out loud. The silence stretches, easy this time. The river laps against the bank like it's been listening too. Here's your historical truth. Babylon may not have loved its sex workers, but it needed them. Their labour propped up more than just taverns and temples. It filled the gaps in society's machinery, the emotional ones, the spiritual ones, the bodily ones. Men came to them in secret and left with something they couldn't name. Women came to them too, sometimes to ask questions, sometimes to warn, sometimes just to cry. And yet when the scribes wrote their records, they wrote around them. Not completely, not invisibly, but always in the margins. Luma folds the cloth carefully and sets it beside her. You know what I hate most, she says suddenly. Not the men, not the temples, not the laws. You raise an eyebrow. It's that no one ever expects us to survive, she says. They write our stories like we're already dead. And here's your fringe fact. Some ancient Babylonian curses involved calling upon the spirit of a woman cast out, a euphemism many believe for a harimtu. The idea was that her ghost, angry and unfulfilled, would haunt your enemies. The insult wasn't just that she was a prostitute, it was that she was unfinished, a life interrupted, a story cut short. Luma tosses a stone into the river. It skips once, then sinks. Maybe that's why I still get up, she says. Just to spite them, just to keep being inconvenient. You tell her she's more than that. She smirks. Don't get poetic on me now. But the truth is, you feel like getting poetic. Because this moment, this city, this woman with her feet in the river and her defiance wrapped in a laugh deserves poetry. She deserves more than what Babylon gave her, more than what it took. You ask her what she wants, if anything could be different. Luma shrugs. A name that doesn't come with a price, a place to sleep that isn't conditional, maybe a man who says thank you instead of sorry. She pauses, then adds, or just a warm meal and a roof that doesn't leak. And here's your scholarly debate. Was there ever a true path out for women like Luma? Some historians think so, pointing to legal cases where former harem-to became landowners or married into respectable households. Others say those were exceptions, not rules. That the system was designed to trap, not transform. But maybe the real question isn't whether escape was possible. Maybe it's whether it should have been necessary in the first place. You both sit there for a while, letting the water speak for you. Somewhere upstream, children are laughing. Somewhere downstream, a man is swearing at a lazy ox. Babylon keeps moving. Eventually, Luma stands, stretches, picks up the bundle of cloth and the carved figure. I'm going to keep this, she says. Not because I believe in magic, just because I want to. You nod. She looks at you one last time. When you tell our story, don't clean it up, she says. Don't make it pretty. Just make it real. Then she walks away. Not slowly, not dramatically, just steadily, like someone who still has more days ahead of her, and maybe, finally, a reason to live through them. You stay by the river, watching the light change. You think about all the women who were never named. All the ones who vanished between temple records and street corners. All the ones who danced for gods and cried alone, and made jokes in dark rooms and saved each other quietly. And you think, they were never forgotten. Not by each other, not by the wind, not by you, because you remember. And memory here in Babylon is its own kind of rebellion.